Good evening, members, and we seem to have an echo in the room. Is it? And good evening to anybody watching this meeting of BCP Overview and Scrutiny Board from home. Warm welcome to you. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Democratic Services and give us the administrative instructions for the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point at the front of the building. Finally, please could you ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on laptops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask members to make sure that their speakers are turned off on their laptops, because we are getting an echo in here. It's not mine because mine is turned off because it doesn't work. Yeah, what testing, 1, 2, 3, is it? Is that the thing? Yeah.
But I'll check the volume.
Okay, it seems to be in order, so we'll carry on. Agenda item 1, apologies. Thank you.
Yes, we've got apologies for this meeting from Councillor Dedman and Councillor Goodall, and we have substitute members. Councillor Chapman-Law is here for Councillor Goodall and Councillor Margaret Phipps, who I believe will be arriving a little bit later, for Councillor Dedman.
Thank you very much. Okay, declarations of interest, members. Do any councillors have any disposable pecuniary interest or any other interest of any other items on the agenda? Thank you, Councillor Trent. Thank you. Agenda item 4, confirmation of minutes, and I know that we have been advised of 1 or 2 errors in the meeting in the minutes. Do you want to take this, please, Claire? Thank you.
Yes, Chair. So the minutes that attach to the agenda have a couple of errors in them. They've been updated on the website and republished, and this was that clause 41 needs to include the relevant agenda items in respect of the declarations of interest made, and clause 43 it just has had the full response from the portfolio holder included to the second public question that we received.
Thank you, Claire. Members, any other amendments? Councillor Trent.
Yeah, just to be pedantic, at the bottom of page 5, you have the meeting adjourned at 7:54 p.m. and resumed at 9 p.m. I don't think we had an hour's break in that meeting. Just in case people think that we're slacking a bit.
Thank you, Councillor Trent, for taking out.
I'll make that update as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item 5, public issues. Do we have any public issues, please?
Yes, we haven't had any public petitions or public questions, but we have received 2 public statements for this meeting. The first one is from Mr. Adam Osman, and he's asked for this to be read out on his behalf. Are you happy that I go ahead with that, Chair? Yeah. So this is in relation to agenda item 6, the 20-mile-per-hour options appraisal report. The proposal to maintain the default speed limit on residential streets falls short. The average walk to school is 2 kilometres in the UK. A 2-kilometre radius of every school in BCP would cover the entire conurbation. Children need protection via 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. A piecemeal approach would merely confuse drivers, half solve the issue, and would cost more with an on and off signage. I question the figure of 300 million to retrofit speed limits. I believe this figure is disproportionately large and must be reviewed. I query the need for enforcement of 20-mile-per-hour speed limits being a barrier to implementation. This is far from the case, as we know 30-mile-an-hour speed limits aren't enforced. There is no reason we cannot work towards enforcement while implementing 20 miles per hour now. Do authorities not allow 20 miles per hour without enforcement? If not so, this is a major barrier to progress and should be tackled. Thank you. Sorry, Chair, I should say the second statement is from Mr. Nick Greenwood, and he is present at the meeting to put his statement to the board. Mr. Greenwood, if you'd like to come forward and take a seat, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dorset Police and CSC Morbus have expressed concerns about the 20-mile-an-hour limit, according to notes for the Cabinet meeting on 6th of March 2024. Data produced in support of 20-mile-an-hour limits cannot be trusted because of the political ego warrior bias to the 2030 agenda. If the data could be trusted, then there should be a case for 12 or 50-mile-an-hour limits, which should be debated. The likely pragmatic difficulties of not using these lower speed limits could be argued for the reduction from 30 miles per hour. The 20-mile-an-hour limit are part of a bigger scheme and are tied in with 15-minute neighborhoods from the 2030 agenda, designed and implemented by the UN and World Economic Forum in pursuit of world governance. Hence the subjectivity of making biased decisions on an unwilling or uninformed public. This should be exposed so the public can make an objective statement, an objective decision. And I show them this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greenwood. Okay, so before we go on to agenda item 6, I just wanted to point out that we've actually slightly changed the order of running this evening, but for some various reasons. And we're going to take Wessex Fields verbal update next on the agenda. So I would like to invite Councillor Slade, Leader of the Council, to give us a brief and just give you a little bit of background on this. Wessex Field has been the subject of a considerable debate over many years, and various strategies are in place for the site. And we understand that there are potential changes to the strategy that was formally agreed. At the time we put this on the agenda, we were not aware that a paper was actually coming forward to Cabinet, which we now are aware a paper will be coming forward to Cabinet at its next meeting. But so that we get an early debate on this subject, we've invited the leader just to give us a verbal update on what's actually happening at the moment, to give us a brief on it. It will be discussed and it will be on our agenda at our next meeting to review the Cabinet paper. So with that, Leader, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm aware that at a couple of scrutiny meetings over the last few months, there have been comments sort of what's going on with Wessex Fields. And the reality is that at the time of those questions being asked and a request for it to go onto the agenda for the forward plan for this committee, there were no plans to change anything that was already done. As you have already explained, the Wessex Fields programme had been added to future places when they were formed. Just for those people who were new to council, the Wessex Fields Road was subject to a local enterprise partnership funding agreement way back in 2016-17. Various reports about acquisition of lands, decisions about what to do with it took place in the last few years of Bournemouth Borough Council. And then in the early days of BCP, we held a significant event at the bridge in Little to look at what we might do with it going forwards. As a result of that, as we've discussed several times, as a result of that, soft market test was done and a number of options came forward. And I think I referred to all of this in my response to a question at council last week, during which I explained that a number of people came forward, submitted their desire to take things forward. And late in 2020, part of the land was disposed to the hospital for the path lab, which is about to open. Once that's all gone through, the rest of the Wessex Fields site was handed over with the other projects to Future Places, and they were doing a work around Future Places during those 2 years that they were operational. At this point, I haven't had any further information from them because, as you know, all of the Future Places work is being wrapped up into bundles and will be presented to Cabinet at a later stage. As far as I'm concerned, that was the end of that until such time as we get that package together. But what was decided at the end of 2023 was that this wasn't going to be a priority site for us. We were progressing with Hulls Bay, the BIC and the Dolphin Leisure Centre, and that this would be on that long list of Future Places projects that would sit there in abeyance until a decision was made. What's changed, and this hadn't changed at the time that councillors started asking for an update, was that we have been approached with an offer to purchase land, and as you would expect, the council is undertaking its due diligence, and it's already scheduled that this site will be going to the cross-party asset disposal working group, which I think is due to take place next week on the 8th. It's already on the agenda. Thank you, Sandra, as chair of that group. So they will be due to look at what is being offered and the details around it, and if they endorse the proposal, and I say if because we really don't know at the moment, then it would come to Cabinet on the 10th of April and potentially to council on the 23rd of April, depending upon the value of the transaction. So at this point, really, there isn't an awful lot to scrutinise. That's why there's no paper, because fundamentally, until the asset working group, which is a cross-party group, decide whether the due diligence suggests that we should progress a sale, there is no sale. And clearly we're restricted in what we can talk about at this point because the due diligence is still being undertaken by the professional officers. So forgive me, I'm not being difficult, but it's down to you whether you scrutinise it at a time when there is some data to scrutinise. At this point, all we can say is that when it goes to the asset working group next week, they will consider it against the criteria that they consider everything against in terms of the price, the seller, the buyer, the relationship between the two, the purpose, whether it suits what the land is allocated for, etc., etc. So yes, I'm happy to answer any questions as best I can, but given that no decision has been made and no paper is yet prepared, it seems a little early to discuss at this point. But I do have some other notes, and I've got fabulous officers who are able to expand, but there may be things that we're unable to give you updates on at the moment.
Okay. Yes, I understand that position, Leader. And maybe I could just kick off and ask the arrangements for phase 2 of the works off the 338, for example, which were approved in 2018, made provision for a potential road leading north from that roundabout. And that roundabout is located, I believe, in this. Is that arrangement protected under any thing that you're looking at the moment, or is that something that will disappear if the land is sold to somebody else?
Well, at this point, all that's being looked at is the offer for purchase of land. So I think until we know what the terms and arrangements are and what's looking to be purchased and for what price and for what purpose, pretty bit early to say what's going to happen. Obviously, any decision that is taken, if a decision were taken to sell, then obviously the implications on other factors around it would need to be part of that paper. So again, it's, you know, these are good questions to ask, but they're being asked at the wrong time, really, because we you know, until there's a heads of terms agreed, if a heads of term is agreed, then you wouldn't be able to clarify what heads of terms were.
Members, Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, there isn't any information from what leaders said about what the site would actually be used for. But I'm assuming that the proviso that was discussed years ago when Wessex Field was first looked after, that it would be something that's ancillary or related to the hospital in some way or other, or compatible with the hospital, is what it would be used for. And is that still going to be compared to what it was supposedly in line with? Because I know that it wasn't going to be disposed of for anything from memory anyway.
Leader.
So again, just to say, I mean, I did make the point when I was asked to come and present this, that it was a bit of a pointless exercise, that actually scrutinising it at the point that we've actually got, you know, a proposal would be the right time to do that, because then we could talk about what might be proposed for the site. Yes, there was a memorandum of understanding between BCP and a third party. Yes, there was further discussions with third parties, you know, in 2020, but without disclosing who the offer is from, it would be impossible for me to tell you what the purpose is. So you can try, Tony, but it would be confidential to talk about who the offer is from, and that might prejudice it. So, you know, with the greatest of respect, I feel tonight is a little bit pointless, and is happening because, you know, one or more members have insisted that we give them an update, when actually the right time to give an update is when there's an update to give.
I fully understand. It's
Yes. Okay.
just the
I mean, I'm going to come to Councillor Broadhead, but in fairness, Leader, there are all sorts of rumours going on for quite some time now, and it's on the overview and scrutiny forward plan for quite some time. And we are now only a few weeks away from when you will have a paper making a hard proposal for this particular site, in one way or the other. You're going to have a paper recommending something to full council. And what we're trying to do in overview and scrutiny is to try to get an early advance warning of the strategy in order that we might understand it and think about what you know, the issues going forward. We're not trying to trick anybody or trip anybody up here. We just want to understand what's happening. Councillor Broadhead.
So could I clarify, just to clarify, the position is, outside of an offer having been received, an offer which has come during the process from, you know, late last year to now, any paper that you asked to come to this meeting would have said this was a Future Places site. There is a piece of work that Future Places will have done, as we believe they will have done with all of the other copious numbers of sites that they had, and those bits of work were being tied up with ribbons and presented to the council, and they would then come at a future date to cabinet to say, well, what would the next steps be? There literally was nothing more to say other than that. Once an offer comes in and that offer goes into the officers doing their due diligence, it's right that we don't talk about the details of that, because it could prejudice, you know, where the officers are. So I'm happy for Adam or Sarah or Christine to expand on that. But I genuinely, you know, rumours may be rumours, but they're certainly, what I can tell you is that there was nothing to be rumours to exist about. The only rumours I heard were the ones I heard when I came to sit here and say, what's happening with this site? Nothing, until such time as an offer has come in. So, you know, it is, I just think that this is a bit of a pointless exercise for today, but, you know, that is where we are. The most important meeting is the one next week, where the cross-party working group will actually be able to look at this according to the criteria that the council have set for deciding whether or not sales should be progressed or not. And once they've done that, then I'm sure that Councillor Moore will be more than happy to update the committee on what their findings were alongside us when a paper comes. But a paper wouldn't be coming if there wasn't an offer on the table.
Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I've got a number of questions, if you don't mind. But I will start with saying saying the word pointless exercise 3 times doesn't make it true. And I do think that there is a reason, as the chair very eloquently articulated, as to why we've been asking for this update. And it's because for much longer time than 2 months now, we have been hearing that the council had dropped their plans that had, as the chair mentioned earlier, had been adopted by this council for the aspiration of Wessex Fields. And just to give a bit of clarity to Councillor Trent, it isn't ancillary to the hospital. The ambition for this site was to be certainly working closely with the hospital, but much more around employment creation. So kind of a science meditech type park was always the aspiration for this. And that's the reason for asking for this to come on again, precisely as you've said, Chairman, because otherwise we could face a situation whereby there has been a very large change in direction and as we're now hearing, a potential offer to an agreement, a suggested agreement to sell the site. And I do think it's absolutely appropriate that Scrutiny has high level input into decisions before they're reached, particularly if there is a change in direction. So, but I will keep it high level, Chairman. I just want to ask the leader a few questions around the principles of this site in particular. So, as Councillor Slade knows, I do sit on that cross-party asset working group. Set it up a few years ago, actually, and I think it has been, by and large, a very useful group to have. However, the most recent group, there were some principles that have been adopted, and I did actually put a recommendation in that group to change those principles because I didn't actually agree with a lot of them. And I just wanted to get your view on the actual principle of disposal of assets for the council, just generally, this one included, and in particular, this idea of how we demonstrate best value, because from what you're saying, Councillor Slade, the intention was to take forward this site as was always intended. We have then received an offer out of the blue. We're considering that offer, putting it to the cross-party working group, and depending on what their recommendation is, that will go to cabinet and then full council. I mean, best value, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of particularly a big site like this, where we know there would be a lot of interest. You and I have both seen the soft market testing document, and there were lots of interested parties. What's your view of whether you are demonstrating best value if you just sell it to one party without considering it on an open market? It's the first question.
Demonstrating best value is one thing. We're not demonstrating best value. We're not having a conversation about demonstrating best value at this point. We're actually allowing our officers to establish what the rules of the game are. We're actually asking them to establish whether the purchaser is they're doing their due diligence. They're establishing that. We're not making a decision at this point. Now, you will know that best value means different things at different times, and it is for our working group to actually look at what is there, which you are going to be there. So, you will decide, won't you, whether to recommend whether this is best value or not. You will make that recommendation under the leadership of Councillor Moore, and we will consider that. Now, if you put forward a change to the principles by which that committee makes its decisions and you were outvoted, then I apologise for that, but that's democracy. They've obviously, got a set of principles. If they decide that the due diligence is done, the due diligence suggests that the price that's being offered is a fair price in the circumstances, then they will recommend it on that basis. So I'm not going to get drawn into it because I have a feeling I know what attempts here around fire sales. There is no fire sale going on here. But if a site is, okay, let's put the boot on the other foot. If we actually said, sorry, it's not for sale, well, what are you going to do with it? We're just going to sit on it for a while because it's not a priority scheme. And in 5 years down the line, we're still sitting on a piece of land when we had an offer for it. We would be criticised for not considering the offer. What's happening at the moment is an offer has come in. The offer is deemed to be credible. The offer is being considered. The due diligence is being done. And the council process will be followed to establish whether or not that is a fair offer and whether it's in the best interest of the council to accept that offer. So I don't think it's about the principle. It's about the principle of what do we do when an offer comes in. And that's really the only place we're at. I absolutely regret the fact that this meeting is happening today, because I don't think this is purely coincidental that an offer has come forward. And I can assure you that prior to the offer coming forward, the only discussion that was being had about Wessex Fields was, here is the list of 19 schemes that Future Places have been working on. We're closing Future Places. Which schemes does this cabinet wish to take forward? And the paper that came forward in October, which confirmed what we're taking forward, was we're taking forward 3 schemes, and the other schemes are not being progressed at this point. But that's the only bit that's an approved process. Was nothing's happening on this site at the moment.
Before you carry on, Councillor, could I bring in Richards, please? He wanted to come in.
Yeah, if I may be able to add something, Chair, in the sense that, the cross-party strategic asset disposal working group under past and current administration have worked on a set of 6 principles. And those 6 principles were endorsed by the past and present working groups and were endorsed by Cabinet on the 26th of July 2023. One of those key principles is that when it comes to achieving best value, the council will ensure that it is in accordance with section 123 of the Local Government Act of 1972, and therefore in meeting that, it is required to ensure that it meets the independent Red Book valuation. And all the value of all the assets that we have sold over the last couple of years, we've taken a independent Red Book valuation to council as our guide. And if through, because some of those, for example, we went to auction on, if the auction price didn't hit that value, we did not sell the asset. So that's the kind of principle with regards to best value. We will ensure that we are making and particularly adhering to the Local Government Act of 1972.
Thank you, Mr. Richards.
Yes, thank you. Now, and look, Councillor Slade, I'm not actually trying to necessarily pick a fight on this particular asset here, and certainly not wanting to get into a discussion in political terms like fire sale, etc., etc. That's not what this is about. It was really just talking about that principle of sale, and I appreciate what the 151 officer is saying around you can demonstrate best value by selling it to one party and just getting a valuation, Red Book valuation, to confirm that. I think our recollections may slightly vary on when those principles were adopted, but we can take that offline. But the question to Councillor Slade was more around the principles of, is it, so for instance, I suppose if you take it another way, if between now and that period of time, other interested parties, having seen this, made clear that they were interested, would she be content that best value was still being demonstrated by pursuing that course, or would, if other offers came in, would that in her mind mean that in order to demonstrate best value, we'd have to do a process such as auction or open market sale, etc., etc. That was really the reason for the question, because I just know that members of the public, they always look at councils, and we've both experienced this. And if sales are happening and they know that other people are interested and they feel like they've been excluded from that process, questions will always be asked, which is why it's, in my view, always better to do it in an open and transparent way. So that was the reason for the question. But I've got a few, I know Councillor Slade wants to come back. I've got just a couple of more questions as well.
Councillor Slade?
So we already know that there's another asset that was being sold based upon the processes here that someone else has got upset about and decided to then put in another offer. And we have to deal with that. If somebody comes along and says, oh, I think I can give you more money than has been agreed under the processes, it's down to officers to make to present us with choices. So what I would say to that is that if as a result of hearing this conversation tonight, another decides to come along and offer us money based upon what they believe the site is worth, then I'm sure the officers would do the right thing, and the asset working group would make their recommendation about whether one or both offers fulfill the principles as set out in that working group, and they may well not be the same principles that you operated under the previous administration, but they are the principles that we operate under right now. And you know, if it fulfills that, then we may well be in a position when it comes to cabinet and potentially scrutiny of saying, well, actually, this is what's on the table. One of our options is don't take that offer, go out to the open market. But we're not there yet. That's what the paper will probably say once the due diligence has been completed. We know whether there is an agreement that can be reached. It may be that there isn't an agreement reached. It may be that your working group next week is cancelled because the amount that we consider it's worth and the amount that the potential purchaser considers it's worth, you know, can't be reconciled. So, you know, I can categorically tell you no decision has been made and no decision will be made until the appropriate democratic process is followed.
Thank you, and that's great to hear, and I appreciate that assurance. For those watching, the principle that I have been uncomfortable with is this principle around it's acceptable to sell something purely based on evaluation. The amendment that I made was saying that I think that could be allowable in certain circumstances, but I would expect the public, if the council is disposing an asset, to assure that best value either via auction or open market sale as a kind of default position, unless there were really overriding reasons otherwise. And, you know, particularly as we move through the process of having, you know, as we move out of having to use our asset sales to fund transformation, and we're by all means not there yet, but we will, you know, particularly if the council's not taking forward a number of these regeneration projects and they're going to be disposing them, then I just think it gives that added assurance to the public. Just the two more very brief questions I have, Chairman, and one is about that government funding that you mentioned at the beginning, and it's good to hear that the leaders update of the journey that this site has been on for some years. You know, I'll declare an interest. I've been involved in that process pretty much all the way through, and I've always thought that this could be a really exciting, you know, science meditech-led employment zone, exactly what our conurbation needs, which is why we've been, you know, it's been pretty central to our policy for so many years. And government clearly thought the same, because we've got, you know, a very sizable chunk of money running into the millions expressly to facilitate that very process. So I just wondered if the leader could just give me her view on how we assure that money isn't clawed back from government if we were to dispose it and somebody else deviated from the plan they provided that funding for. And I've got one final question. Thank you.
So two things. The first thing to say is that the funding that came through the Local Enterprise Partnership was about job creation. It didn't dictate what we did with the site. It was about jobs. So I'm writing that on time. It's about jobs, not. It wasn't specifically about the requirement to build a Meditech park or anything else. It was the requirement to generate a certain number of jobs. So I need to put that clearly that, you know, no one is saying that it should or should not be for that purpose. If it generates the jobs, it fulfills the requirements of that funding. And so it doesn't dictate what a future user might use it for. The other thing which I've really I've got to say this, I'm really sorry, but I think I heard Councillor Broadhead just try and actually say contradict the reality, and that is what I'm not saying is that we will always sell it by default to the highest bidder, and that there isn't a default mechanism that we will go out to an auction or to public sale. It's the right thing to do is what the right thing to do is. And the principles of that group talks about when it is appropriate to go out to public sale and when it isn't necessary to go out. So it's really important that, you know, what we will do is we will have this assessed according to the principles of that group. And the principles of that group does give other criteria depending upon who the seller is. You know, if somebody was going to buy a site from the council that was going to be of huge social and environmental value, but were going to pay less for it than somebody who was going to use the site for a means that we were not comfortable with or that didn't have decent social, environmental and community value, we might decide to sell it to somebody at a lower value than somebody who wanted to pay a lot of money to do something that we didn't feel comfortable with. And we reserve the right to do that as long as we've gone through the right process and that we've done it in an open, transparent way. And I think that's exactly what we're going to do. So, I don't know whether I'm
Okay. Thank you, Leader. Mr. Richards.
Yeah, just to add to the leader's comments in the sense that the purpose of the due diligence that's currently being undertaken is to consider the kind of matter that Councillor Broadhead has just highlighted with regards to the original funding, the LEP funding, what the conditions, how the conditions have been met, are there any repayment requirements, if the world changes, all of that sort of stuff is sort of part of the due diligence to consider so that we can then properly and appropriately advise the cross-party asset disposal working group.
Thank
I
you.
want to come back on this point.
Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, I just wanted to put my 5 eggs in. I apologise.
What, on this particular point?
Yeah, because I'm chairing this strategic asset working group, and we keep talking about the principles, and yes, the principles were raised. I think there's 4 of us were actually here tonight. We're actually at that working group meeting, and I have to point out that those 6 principles had already been approved by the working group, and at the meeting it was confirmed that previously Cabinet had endorsed those principles, and there was a debate and there was a vote, and the result of the vote was that they stayed the same, basically. But the next meeting is Friday, the 8th of March. And we have no report as yet, because obviously we're waiting for the results of what's due diligence and what's going to happen. But if the meeting does take place, then obviously there's going to be a full and frank discussion. Councillor Broadhead always makes his point known, and I'm sure he will do it at this particular one. So, and I welcome the debate, don't get me wrong.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Before we carry on, I'm aware that Councillor Tarling wants to come in. No, but you're on a separate point. You're on the, and also Councillor Dove also wants to come in. Just wanted to let you know that I haven't forgotten you. Okay, so one last one. Thank you quickly. Thank you.
Very much the last one, Chair, and thank you for the debate on this. And just to put the leader's mind at rest, I wasn't putting words in her mouth. I was saying it was me that had raised that, and it's purely because that principle as it stands. Just I think the wording is that best value is defined as achieving a red book valuation, and my suggestion was that we should strengthen that and say the default position should be that we go to open market unless there are such reasons as the leader has outlined. And I just thought it was important to have a standing position that, particularly because one of the other principles is I think a deviation in saying that the council is going to dispose assets unless there's a reason to keep them, whereas previously you kind of kept them unless there was a reason to dispose them. So if you are moving to a position of disposing assets unless you really need them, I think it's also important to make sure that you're trying your best to demonstrate to the public. But the very final point I have on this is you mentioned at the beginning, Chair, the road of Wessex Fields, and again, when this site was acquired by the previous Bournemouth Borough Council, it was very much about an employment-led scheme, as we've heard. It was very much about being aspirational for new modes of employment that we wanted to achieve in the area, but it was also a recognising that this is probably one of the most congested areas of our conurbation, and it was always agreed, and again it was agreed as part of the government funding on this, that they would have a through road that came through it. Now, we had this debate when Vicky was leader the first time, in that there was I think it's safe to say, a difference of opinion about whether that road should be a through road or whether it shouldn't be a through road. It's certainly been something that I've always been very keen to see, not because it would be in and of itself alleviating the traffic, but particularly if you are adding the quantum of jobs that we're talking about there. And the planning permission, and Chair, you sat on the planning board at that time, made very clear, for instance, that a through road, but only southbound, could only unleash 500 jobs. If you wanted the full quantum of jobs on this site, you'd have to build the other junction as well. But all of that was predicated on full access all the way through. Now, the leader and I both know that there is an interested party who has very, very, very publicly said that they would take legal action to the council if that through road wasn't assured. So I just wanted your assurance, leader, as part of this process, if you were to dispose of this. I appreciate we'll get more detail in the coming months, that we are committed to making sure that the principles that were agreed as part of that planning process of a through road would continue, and that we'd be really firm on that as a council, because otherwise a very strong chance that we'd have legal action taken against us.
Leader?
Well, given that there's threats of legal action, I really don't think today is the time to be discussing the potential future of that site. I'm going to, well, no, I'm not going to comment on it at all, because I'm not going to be held to whatever might be said tonight. What's being said tonight is an update on where we are. This isn't about just making a decision. Whatever legal restrictions, financial restrictions, policy restrictions are relevant is all part of the due diligence. So with the greatest of respect, I'm not going to answer that, because it's absolutely critical that we don't stray into something that's going to actually make things even more complicated. There is a process of due diligence happening. Once that has been completed, then those are absolutely correct questions to ask at the point of scrutiny or cabinet, once we actually know what we're dealing with. I don't have the details of that. I just wanted to clarify about the comment that was made about a principle of sale over retention. And I think we do have to remember two things. The costs of holding on to a building or piece of land are not negligible. You know, in many, many cases, there is a direct cost of keeping something. Now, obviously, in a building, that's a lot more than it is on a piece of land, but there are costs in terms of the ecological costs, in terms of security costs, in terms of all sorts of things that sitting on a piece of land and not doing anything is not necessarily in the best interests of anybody. And more importantly, we've made it clear this is a deprioritised site, that there is no capacity in the council for us to develop this site for tens or hundreds of millions of pounds over the next, few years. There is the opportunity lost of sitting on a site and doing nothing. Actually selling a site could actually create huge amounts of opportunity and economic value in other ways. So that's why I don't think we should have an assumption of retention. We should actually look at every case on its merits. Is there a good reason for the council to hold it? If there is no good reason for the council to hold it, then why not look at whether someone else can make better use of it?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Councillor Tarling, thanks for your patience.
Yes, thank you very much. For my part, I'm very excited to see what Disney Corporation's got in mind for the piece of land. In the case it isn't, I'm equally excited to what we find on Friday. With that in mind, obviously we've mentioned that the timings on Friday we've got a meeting of the panel, property panel that's mentioned. What would the occasion be? Is there a time in the diary post cabinet, pre-council, where we could bring it back to overview and scrutiny?
Yes, on the 2nd of April.
So it's really a moot point. All these discussions we had are very good, but they're a precursor to a discussion we can have on the 2nd of April.
Yeah, as I explained, we weren't aware that paper was coming forward until last week to cabinet.
So that paper wouldn't be coming forward if there wasn't an offer. That's the reality. That paper is being prepared as a result of this. There wouldn't be a paper coming to cabinet in April. This has been created in order to facilitate a decision as required at the end of this process. So I feel like we're going around in circles, but at some point later this year, there would have been a paper about all the options for all of the sites that we're not progressing in the short term. And that is being accelerated on this site because it needs to line up with, oh, we've got an offer, we better do something with it.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Councillor Dove.
Thank you, and Chair, thank you very much for bringing this forward. I, as ward councillor, was one of those councillors that asked for this to come to scrutiny, and the reason for that is, yes, there has been a lot of discussion since the end of the summer about what's happening on this site, And I absolutely disagree with the leader, whether it's been said knowingly or whether perhaps information has been withheld from her. But the chief executive himself spoke to me in around about the start of October time about what we can do with this site, and discussed about this person who's made the offer, whether they would be a suitable person to purchase that site. So this is not brand new information. And this is really is not something
Sorry,
where
Just a moment, please, Councillor Dove. The leader wants to interject.
yes, sorry. Councillor Dove has indicated that somebody may have made an offer. We have absolutely no information here tonight about who the person, organisation, company, whatever is that has approached us with the offer. Councillor Dove is inferring something which has absolutely no basis in fact. There may well have been a conversation with an individual who may have been talking about their thoughts about it, but that doesn't mean that something's actually been happening. And I absolutely, you know, that is not for this meeting.
Okay, thank you, leader. Okay, carry on, please, Councillor Dove.
yeah, so actually, in fact, we did have the conversation with the chief executive about how I would feel as ward councillor, this person purchasing that land and developing it. So this hasn't come out of the blue. It has absolutely been going on, and negotiations have been going on. And if you know that area down there, you will know it's quite a tight-knit community. And so the person who's thinking of buying the site has also been speaking to their neighbours, and those discussions have been going on throughout the winter as well. This isn't brand new information, and I'm very sorry that it's turned out to be brand new information to the leader and she's been kept in the dark, or failing that we have been misled this evening. So what I'd like to know is there have been feasibility studies.
Sorry to
Yeah.
interject, Councillor Dove. I mean, there is a certain degree of hypotheses in what you're saying here, because we haven't, as the leader has said, she has had nothing formal, and you're reflecting on what was probably going on in the background anyway, as any of these things do, as they lead up to a particular situation where somebody leads up to an offer. But if we want to carry on with this particular line of debate,
No,
we're going to have to go into private session, I'm afraid.
No, I had moved on actually. I was just about to start to talk about the feasibility studies.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I think I was just reflecting on, I'm you know, it's very sad that perhaps either the leader hasn't been updated, or B, perhaps that full information hasn't come forward. But in terms of the feasibility studies, Future Places did provide lots of feasibility studies and business cases in terms of what would happen with the various sites that they've been working on. So what I'd like to know is whether at that meeting on the 8th, the one for Wessex Fields will be presented, whether in draft form or not, and those options will be considered.
Okay, is that one?
I'm happy to let officers answer whether they would. As I say, those papers have not yet been seen by anyone in cabinet, so it would be rather previous to for us to have not seen those papers. But Adam?
Clearly, the strategic cross-party asset disposal working group on the 8th of March, and the report, will make reference to the fact, as leader had done previously, with regards to the work of BCP Future Places and the status of that work, which I think the leader eloquently referenced earlier as part of this debate. Now, I expect that report, subject to due diligence, to reflect on where we were with that piece of work, and how the proposal that's coming forward, reflects and relates to anything that has previously been discussed or considered in regards to this site. But, I do recognise that there, and I stand to be corrected, that there was never a formal recommendation from BCP Future Places to this council by way of presenting a business case for investment that went to cabinet or council for consideration. But I do stand to be corrected on that one.
Yes, thank you very much.
So can I come back on that, please?
Yes, on it.
Yes, so I haven't talked about reports that have come to council or to cabinet, and I think that's been deliberately misunderstood. BCP Future Places did feasibility studies and carried out business cases on all of the sites that they've been working on as part of that handover package. So therefore, what I'm asking is, will the report for Wessex Field, whether in draft, because it's entirely up to the officers whether or not they move it out of draft, whether in draft or whether sort of adopted, will go to the panel or the committee on the 8th of March.
Leader?
Yeah, or what I would say is I'm glad that Councillor Dove knows everything that Future Places did, because she seems to be the only person that does. When the papers came back from Future Places, I think we all know that there aren't full feasibility studies, business plans and everything else. There was, you know, it was one of a number of schemes in its early infancy. And, you know, what we can't tell you is how much information is there on this particular site, because this particular site was almost as far down the list of priorities as it is for us at the moment. You know, if there is appropriate information that will help that committee to make their decisions, then they'll make their decision based upon the information that is presented. But, you know, please don't make the assumption that there's a whole load of feasibility studies for this site, because I'm sure, Christine, you're able to. Like, thank you, Adam. Because Christine obviously was working there previously.
Mr. Richards?
Chair, if I may, just to add something, you know, I am of the view that with regards to the work of BCP Future Places on this site, that it was not finalised, and that's why nothing was then came forward to Cabinet or Council for consideration. With regards to the report of the 8th, now clearly we'll discuss the matter with the Chair, but I'm, without putting words in the Chair's mouth, was surprised if she would want to see anything that wasn't finalised from BCP Future Places. If it was, then clearly there may be a relevance, but I don't think it was.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Okay, members, I think we're probably coming towards the end of that. I've got a couple of questions of my own.
Sorry, Chair, I've just got one more question.
I'm sorry,
That's
Councillor
okay.
Dove.
So I'm really, I think it's sad, isn't it, that all this work has been done and they won't see it on the 8th, and really maybe that should be something that that panel should consider. What I would like, and this is my last question, is one of the things that the leader was very insistent on probably about a year ago, if not a little bit more, was that absolutely all of the sites that were coming forward for disposal went either open market or auction, and that was the default position. And I'd like to understand why, when it was adopted by Cabinet and the Council, why she's going against that now.
We've just had that conversation that there is a set of principles that the cross-party asset working group has established, that, you know, that there are different circumstances for different places. I'm really not going to be drawn. I resent the fact that it's been suggested that we've deliberately missheld information, that someone's deliberately lied to me, that stuff's been going on behind the scenes, and allegations about who is the offerer, when absolutely we've made it very clear we haven't told you who's making the offer. So, you know, it's really unhelpful. The reality is the reality, and that is this site was not being progressed very quickly by Future Places. There is not a lot to see here. We haven't yet seen any papers about what was being planned, because we've been prioritising those sites that we are taking forwards: the Bic, Holes Bay, Dolphin Leisure Centre. This site was not going to be progressed, therefore it was put in a cupboard, and at some point when the paper is ready, we'll have a look and see what has been done with it and make a decision. In the meantime, somebody has come forward and said, we'd like to buy this site. Will you talk to us? We've said, well, of course we'll talk to you. Let's hear more about it. That's where we are. So I'm absolutely happy to answer any of these questions once we're at a point where it's appropriate to disclose the details of who the offer is from, how much the offer is for, and what the offer is to do with the site. But at this point, I think it's actually just, you know, it's like picking at a scab, really.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, lastly, I'd just like to say thank you for bringing this forward, because any discussion regarding Wessex Fields looks like it'll be below the line, at least in public. People understand what's going on with this authority at the moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Dove. Okay, I have a couple of questions now. The first one is that the local plan does say that this site is a primary employment site. Now, without asking you to comment on this, I'm trusting that that will remain the strategy and will be a part of the consideration as to whether this is site is sold or not, or and that will be part of that consideration. Don't need an answer. I'm just, unless you're going to disagree that my assumption is wrong. And the second question is, do we need to sell it? Is there an imperative to get the cash? You know, is the transformation program funded without the sale? Do we need it to balance the MTFP? That's okay. Do you want to go? I see Mr. Richards is.
But what I would say is, of course, we don't need it to balance the MTFP because you know, we have a balanced budget and a balanced MTFP for the first time in our history. We have 4 years where our MTFP balances. And obviously, you know, any asset that we choose to sell, which allows us then to have more capital to do things to fulfill our priorities, you know, that needs to be considered. Whether we need to sell it, whether we want to sell it, whether selling it creates an opportunity to drive something else. You know, if, for example, it generated X number of additional jobs, that generates people spending money in our local economy. So whether we need the money in order to balance the books is one factor, but it shouldn't be the only factor. It should be whether it's in the best interest. And I would fully expect the options appraisal that comes forward for Cabinet in April, assuming the asset working group is content, I would fully expect it to explore all of those options. Any alternative ways of sale, if it was felt that those are other options we should consider, and you know what the choice for keeping it and what the costs of keeping it would be, as well as the costs of sale. So I think we should look at everything that is available to us. I think that's the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you very much, Leader. And I think we're going to wrap this up now, unless there was something you wanted to add, Mr. Richards.
Maybe just to slightly tweak what the leader said, because what the leader said was absolutely talking about the council's revenue budget, and it's clearly balanced over a 4-year period based on a number of assumptions. With regards to capital receipts, you know, and the funding of the transformation program, what we said as part of the budget report that was discussed last week at Port Council was we recognised there was about, from memory, I think about a £3.8 million shortfall, but there was a schedule of assets that were under consideration potentially that could realise that value to give us that receipt. And clearly any conversation about Wessex Fields, if that was turned into receipt, would be able to be a contribution towards that £3.8 million. So it's just a slight nuance on what the leader said. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, members, I think we'll draw that to a close. And I would say I don't actually think this has been a waste of time. I'm glad that we have broached some of the issues, and I'm sure that there will be further discussion when we bring it back to scrutiny on the 2nd of April. And no doubt we should look forward to that debate to see what Cabinet are coming up with, obviously are coming up with. So thank you so much for spending your time coming in and explaining that.
Thank you for changing the agenda so I could get home to myself.
So members, I think, you know, we'll plod on, shall we? And go to the next agenda item, which is the people and communities 20-mile-per-hour options appraisal, which I think is a paper that's looking to sanction some budget expenditure on this. So I think who's going to, Millie, you're going to introduce this for us? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. So what we've got in front of us really is a report and a review of our 20-mile-per-hour programme. You know, it looks at some of our local schemes that we have and what the outcome has been, which is really positive, actually. We have 77 areas of 20-mile-per-hour zones and limits across BCP. And from those, I think,
you know, the report's quite sort of self-explanatory in what it's saying, but I just wanted to pick out some of the facts that we have. So, for example, we see a drop of 40% in the average casualty collision at when we have 20-mile-per-hour zones. So it seems at a local level that it's worked quite well for us. But really, this is about looking to the future and what do we want to do as an administration and as a council to be able to tackle road safety, improve it for people and stop as many people dying on our roads. The approach we're taking here is to try and tackle that frequency and severity of accidents. So fewer accidents at less, you know, that aren't quite as bad in terms of killing or severely injuring people on our roads. And a way to do that is this 20-mile-per-hour approach, which we've seen lots of other areas explore and implement, not just locally, but nationally as well. There is a real push to try and improve road safety through limiting speed. And the reason for that is because of the evidence that it presents. So we have a 97.5% chance of survival if you're struck by a vehicle that's going at 20 miles per hour compared to an 80% if you're going at 30 miles per hour. And that's because really the stopping distances are a lot shorter. We have a lot more control. It slows everything down and gives a little bit.
Sorry, excuse me. We're just picking up the sound of conversations in the audience. If you don't mind, you should be quiet, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a little bit distracting. So we call these the casualties that we see are KSIs, and I've been learning a lot of terminology since I took over the road safety element of the transport portfolio, and that's really killed or seriously injured on the roads. We are looking at 20 miles per hour as one of the measures that we're doing, one of those interventions to improve road safety. So things like school streets also help. We have things like permanent crossings, pedestrian crossings, and really it's part of a mix rather than just going for a one-way approach. And by having that sort of intervention approach across lots of different areas, we should be able to help reduce our KSIs. We've also been talking a lot through this report about taking that evidence-based approach and making sure that we are delivering value for money for residents. So where we have an allocation of money from our LTP, and I'll talk a little bit about that a bit later on, this is about where can we implement 20-mile-per-hour zones, which are going to have the most impact and the least amount of negative impact, because I think there are some negative impacts that come from 20-mile-per-hour zones. It's just about trying to make the most gains in terms of road safety. Appendix A is, if you have your papers, you can have a look at Appendix A. It shows the legacy work that was done in the previous administration, in the previous councils, around 20-mile-per-hour zones. And I think you can kind of see that Paul really went ahead with this under their council, whereas Bournemouth and Christchurch maybe didn't want to go down that route. But in Poole, we have some really big areas of 20 mile per hour. So Poole Town is almost all 20 mile per hour. I'm very lucky. I represent Newtown and Heavlands in Poole, and one of the reasons I'm lucky is because it is a 20 mile per hour zone, and I have about 5 roads in my ward which are not 20 mile per hour zone, and I still get emails and residents in touch about making them safer, reducing speed limits, and that kind of thing. So I think councillors have had that experience from residents that they value road safety. Where we want to go with this is being able to take that evidence approach, but also work with communities to see where they would value this the most. We are particularly interested in areas where there is that very high level of road deaths and serious injuries, but making sure that we are consulting with councillors, we're consulting with our stakeholders, whether that's the police, the bus services, also with residents as well. So we're looking to basically do a bit of a have your say consultation when we propose an area
find out what people think about it. They'll feed into that conversation, and then we can come to a decision. And finally, I was just going to say how this is funded. So it's a 149k allocation for the 24-25 year, and that's coming from the local transport plan capital grant. I'm not sure if people are aware of the background of that, but it's a capital grant we get from government, which is very, very large. This is a very small proportion of it. It's one section of £3 million worth of road safety work that we're doing from that overall grant, and the aim is to see where it can take us in terms of improving road safety with all the other things we're putting in place. I'm just trying to read my notes here. Oh yeah, so the final thing to say is that this is not, we're not going to be implementing a blanket 20-mile-per-hour speed limit with £149,000 funding. That just isn't going to happen. This is more around how we can set a programme going forward, monitor the impacts of the places where we have implemented, look at whether it's worked, what could change, what can be improved, and essentially sort of roll out to other areas where it's going to make that real difference, and where residents want to see that change in their neighbourhood so that they can enjoy a much more peaceful and safe neighbourhood. I have got with me Councillor Hadley, who is the lead for climate. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Energy environment.
Climate, energy and environment. So lots of transport related stuff, and between us, me, Councillor Hadley and Councillor Slade have been looking at this work, and we also have Richard Pearson, who's a road safety officer for the council, and Richard Pincroft and Julian McLaughlin online, if we have any questions for officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Earl. I have to say, it's difficult. There were 3 portfolio holders involved in this. Could you just sort of outline what your relative responsibilities are within there? Because I'm finding it really confusing working out who's doing what. Do you know yourselves?
When we formed the administration, we felt that transport was too much of an area when it includes so many different elements of other priorities across the administration. So we ended up splitting it up into 3, so that road safety sits with the community's brief rather than with transport and looking at that sort of wider area. Andy focuses on the active travel as well as highways, and yeah, go on.
Yeah, Councillor Slade is the leader, is looking at strategic work and partnership working, because obviously as part of our work, we have to work on a regional basis and with partners that she's dealing with on other elements. As Councillor Earl said, partly because of the crossover with the environment portfolio, which I hold on things like road maintenance and the tactical work. I'm looking after that and the link into travel, and also because the sustainable transport work also.
Thank you. So, all right, members. Okay, we have a list already. Councillor Moore's going to be first, and then Councillor Broadhead, and then Councillor Northover, and then we've got everybody wants to speak. Yeah. Okay, let's start off with Councillor Moore then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't know I was going to be first, but okay. So we've got a proposal for a dedicated budget of 149,000 for this year. So for some people, clearly that's a great deal of money, but for a council the size of BCP, that money may well not go very far. So can I ask, what exactly would we be paying for? For example, what costs are involved in reducing the speed in a residential road or in front of a school from 30 to 20? I'm thinking along the lines of how much do road signs cost, and does the council need to pay for any legislation to reduce the speed limits? What is involved in actually reducing the speed, and the sort of costs involved? Neither of you can answer
Yeah,
that.
No,
You're
I'm
not-
happy to
They're,
take
they're
it.
looking at each other here. So councillor Hadley, go on.
Sorry, it's a double act, and I'm here to support councillor Earl, and I was letting that speak first. Yeah, particularly there's two different types of option that you've got here. One is zones, and that involves a lot of physical measures. So in Heatherlands area, there are a lot of chicanes or humps and other measures. Those are very expensive. And so that's not the recommended approach. The recommended approach is effectively border signs and roundels on the road, which are relatively cheap. I don't have the actual figures for that, but that's the basis on which we believe that we can do probably 3 of the areas. So in Appendix B, it's got a map which shows some of the areas. And as a ballpark, before we've had any discussion about the prioritisation based on the safety record on crashes that killed and serious injury accidents, and also working with ward councillors and communities about desire. That's the basis. We probably think that in this year's budget to come, we'd be able to do maybe 3 schemes. But it would just be the signs, and obviously then, sorry, you also said about legal. We would have to go through a TRO because you are reducing the speed. Yes.
So it's the TRO that's actually costing the money, isn't it? More than anything else, more than the signage and everything else, I would imagine.
The TRO process is a cost, but what we can do by implementing more of these sort of area 20 mile per hour zone rather than going road by road, that squishes the TRO all into one, so we can do it in one process rather than just one road here and there.
Just before we carry on to the next one, councillor Salmon, I know you've put your hand up, but you're sort of somewhere near the list, but you put your hand up again. Did you want to respond on that specific point?
Thank you. I did just want to clarify, just so I'm making sure I understood, because Sandra's asked the question, one of the questions I wanted to ask. No, that's okay. Thank you. When you're talking about the areas and the 3, an estimate of 3 areas in a yearly budget, is that the blocks of purple on the map? Is that what an area is? So
Yes, potentially, but it might be. So effectively, those highlight some of the distributor roads that you probably wouldn't put down to 20 miles an hour. I mean, a lot of this is just, that is an indication for how you could chunk down the BCP area to highlight particular zones. It might be that you look at 2 adjacent ones as one. So you might treat either side of a major road as one area for the purposes of the work, and that has yet, that's the detail yet to be done. Effectively, this is about setting aside the budget and the direction of travel that says we do want to do this. It does. It is a road safety improvement. We've seen a 40% reduction in accidents where they haven't been deployed within BCP, which is actually better than some of the areas elsewhere in the country. And so, based on that, we'd like to go forward, and that's really what we're looking at today.
yeah, no, thank you. Just clarifying what an area might mean. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we have to be mindful here this debate about what the recommendation is that we're actually considering, and it's about whether in principle we agree that amount of money should go forward to help develop these schemes. So that's the question that we're really addressing tonight. So, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Chairman. A bit of a continuation on that theme, actually, and I've got a few detailed questions later on, but I'll let other people speak. But just on a high level, I'm wondering whether I'm a bit confused or whether the public might be a bit confused, because, a lot in this paper, hard to argue with. Of course, we want to see appropriate speed limitations in areas where it is most needed. And there's a lot in this paper about being sensible and looking at it on an iterative basis. We've also heard from the portfolio holders talking about, starting with 3 schemes, the start of a process. The deputy leader said that, she wanted to set a programme of all of this. And yet, in the full council where this was first spoken about, there was a question from a member of the public saying, will you work to make BCP a 20 mile per hour zone? And the deputy leader said yes, that she wanted to see a default 20 mile per hour speed limit to be adopted as a kind of a larger aspiration. And this is where I'm really confused. Anybody that is the member of the public watching this, if you've got access to the papers, I'd urge them to look at Appendix B, because Appendix B shows where the aspiration is for this proposed delivery area is a 20 mile per hour speed limit, albeit as part of a programme, and it is basically the whole of BCP. So what I want to know is, which is it? Is it a case of, we'll look at evidence-based areas where this is appropriate, or is it, as Appendix B, if we had all the money and if and when we get the hands on the money, we want to do pretty much the whole area? Because I think the public have a right to know that.
Another bad question, Councillor Broadhead. Is it, Councillor Earl? Is it the whole area?
Well, what I find really frustrating is when we put together the answer to that question, I tried to be really clear and say it's the ambition. You know, this is the ambition that over a long period of time we would get to a point where the 30 miles per hour, 40 miles per hour is the exception. And what I mean by that is that, you know, our trunk roads might be 30, some main roads where you don't have many exits and entrances and very low hazards. But actually, for me, it's around most of our area being residential and most of us wanting to live in residential areas that are good on road safety. So as much as it did get a little bit pulled out of context, and I think that probably was just down to the question, setting the framing for the answer, whereas really it should have been the other way around. This is more around a long-term ambition to create 20 mile per hour as a speed limit for our neighbourhoods. And because we're made up of neighbourhoods, you know, by default, it's default.
Okay, if you're quick, because there's a lot
I-
to speak on
and
this.
I appreciate the answer because that's very, very clear. And she reiterated her initial response that it is an aspiration to be BCP as a default 20 mile per hour with exceptions. That is just a little bit different from the paper and the introduction that we've had, which kind of talks about you know, only where it's appropriate and everything like that. You know, so I actually appreciate the ownership of, yes, they would like to see BCP as a 20 mile per hour default. It's clear. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Hadley, thank you.
Yeah, part of this is the Royal Society of Prevention of Accidents and others are clearly saying that it's really desired where people live. And there are many other communities around the country that are taking a more radical approach and going faster on this. We want to go with communities. We want to work with, sorry? Well, Bristol and Edinburgh are two examples where they've gone citywide. So I think there's something about working at a pace that is sensible. Certainly, people in my ward are not clamouring to increase the speed again from 20 mile an hour. There are some places where they really like having you know tamed roads. So I think it's important that we work with communities at a pace. It's also about what money we can get from the Department for Transport to dedicate for this task and balancing it with crossings and other interventions that we can make in the meantime.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Northover.
Thank you. I had a look at Appendix B and I thought, wow, this is brilliant. Because we've got our neighbourhoods, but you only would be driving for a minute or two and then you're on, you know, I thought through a few little scenarios if I was going from one place to another. You know, you're only ever going to be a minute at the beginning and a minute at the end at 20 miles an hour. So I don't really know why anybody would have any problem with that small inconvenience. But then I've just realised tonight that this isn't just all going to happen at once and it's going to be slow, which is, I think, a real shame. So I've got there's a road in my ward called Normanhurst Road, and there's been one accident there in the last 5 years. So it's not ever going to be a priority in our usual scheme or even in the third of the recommendations, but they're really scared. They have things like their pets, they feel upset that they're at risk, and so they're never going to reach our priority list. But they went and did a petition and they got 70 signatures out of 80 houses, like in a couple of days. Only one person was against it, and I think there's loads and loads of roads that are like that. Nobody really wants I don't know anybody who wants people going over 20 miles an hour, and I think it would be good if we could roll it out much faster. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there's an answer unless you wanted to come back on that. That's right.
Thank you, Councillor Northover, and I agree in many ways that, you know, if we are going to take that evidence approach,
than evidence-based approach, then it could mean that some places don't get this for a very long time. But I think that is the state of local government finance at the moment. That's where we are. We don't know if our, maybe this our capital funds will improve potentially with a change in government, especially if they're as interested in road safety as we are as an administration. So there are potential things that can change in the future. At the moment, we have £149,000 to start investigating and start implementing where we can, and of course consulting.
Thank you. Councillor Phipps, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I've got some concerns about this report, and basically about the process of this, because we're faced here without any consultation whatsoever with our residents, with the possibility of in the long term, 20-mile-per-hour speed limits across the majority of BCP has already been mentioned, which is on the map on page 27. This was certainly nothing that I mentioned to my residents when I was elected, and I know that my other Christchurch Independent colleagues didn't either. I just wonder where this has kind of come from, because I'm quite shocked about it, that it's come forward in this format. The Department for Transport document on speed limits, which is actually mentioned in this report, clearly states a comprehensive and early consultation of all those who may be affected by the introduction of a 20-mile-per-hour scheme is an essential part of the implementation process. This needs to include local residents. It goes on to mention the bus services and the police, etc. And it seems that they have been spoken to because they're in the report. But actually, I don't think anybody's actually asked the residents, and they're the ones that are actually going to either benefit or not, depending on your point of view, or which area you're in, I don't know, but nobody's even asked them. So it seems to me a bit of a flawed process, because we're asking for money to do things. And when, as we all know, if you get money from the government for a certain scheme, which this is it, then if you don't spend it on that scheme, I know this may be in stages or whatever, you've got to give the money back. So you're asking for government money, and if it's forthcoming, you haven't even asked anybody yet whether they actually want these or in which areas. Also, you talk about you've been hanging this on safety. Okay, I understand. I personally don't have a problem with 20-mile-per-hour limits, certainly around schools or where there's casualties or anything like that. And if residents want it in their area, fine. But actually, you need to ask them, It says in the report that 20-mile-an-hour limits, which is what is being proposed here, not zones, although you have been talking about those, they purport to reduce casualties by 0 to 11%. Please note the 0. Every area will be different, and many, I would suspect, might not even have a problem, actually. There may have been no accidents whatsoever, and there might not be a problem, but we don't know, because we haven't got any evidence about each of these areas that are proposed. Nobody's come up with any, as far as I'm aware. This is, I don't think, just about safety. It also, there are effects, and it does say in the report yet again about who might be affected, those that need their car, people in taxis, that rely on taxis, care workers. I'm sure you've read it. And also it does tend to, in some areas, can put congestion onto other roads. And those other people around those areas are also not being consulted at this time. So I do have concerns about the process of this. Personally, I think it would be better to potentially go with option 1 here, or paragraph, it was A, the first option, that we should be looking at 20-mile-per-hour speed limits, perhaps introduced around schools or where there have been significant numbers of casualties in the past, or areas where we've actually done some consultation and residents actually want these. There doesn't seem to be any openness and transparency in this. I just think we should be researching this, looking at the evidence for each of these areas, and there's a whole lot of them here, regarding accident data, and do something meaningful with a consultation by asking residents in each area who are in the roads, because otherwise you should have to be a bit careful. You just get others from other areas just piling in, but people that actually live there, do they actually want this? If they do, fine. If they don't, then we need to be taking note of that. So I think that's where we should be going. And I'm not overly happy at all with the process of this report. Thank you.
So Earl?
Thank you, Councillor Phipps, and I would agree with you. I think we are in a, this is very early stages in terms of taking 20 miles per hour ahead, but it will be partly because it's legal, but we have to have that approach of consultation. Like you said, the guidance is there from government, and the legislation under the TRO process also means that we need to consult on any changes to road speeds. So don't worry, that is to come. But what I wanted to just say is we've been talking about this recently about how a consultation would look, and the preference at the moment is to go down a sort of have your say route, where people can post online through a consultation or go into their library and do it in those areas that have the highest KSIs, which is where people are killed and seriously injured, as a starting point to see what they feel as the public. And just to say again, I think councillors, and I please do disagree with me if there are any councillors who have never had someone write to them about road safety or speeding traffic, like I would really welcome that. But I have 5 roads which are non 20 mile per hour, and they are all asking for being that. So for me, and for the way we established this as a bit of a priority, was because we are concerned as an administration that people are still dying and still being seriously injured on our roads, and we feel that that is unacceptable. I absolutely do not think we should not set an ambition to improve road safety, and this is one way we can do it, which is relatively cheap and also has a really big impact in terms of slowing down traffic and improving road safety across the board.
Did you want to come back, Councillor?
Could I just come back on that? Yeah, I understand everything you're saying, but you've actually said exactly what I thought you were going to say. Oh, but there will be a consultation, but later on, Well, we should be doing it before. Why are we getting the money for something for loads of schemes that are on a map or asking for money, and depending on how much we get, but we haven't asked anybody yet. It's all a bit back to front, and that's where you didn't really answer about process here. And I just mentioned some of these consultations as well. I have to say some of the public, I think, have lost confidence in some of them, because we tend to ask questions to try so that you can get the answers that you want. And that happens quite a lot. I mean, you can have a look at the current LTP4 survey, which I think is a prime example. And quite often, even if you don't get the answer you want, then people's concerns aren't always taken into account, or they're not taken notice of. So anything consultations have to be meaningful, but I think this is a back to front process. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Hadley?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think we do have to identify that we've got a budget before we go out to the public and ask them questions that don't have a chance of getting implemented. And there is something about yes, I appreciate we absolutely do need to do consultation. I actually think our consultation is not great. I think it would be better if we did some representative polling of people, because what people climb on in terms of things, and certainly some of the other consultations, people who will vote more than once and think it's a vote rather than a consultation. But the other bit of that is when we have had in the last 5 years 708 killed or serious injuries on BCP's roads, and that's a significant number of people whose lives are changed, permanently changed. Small number of deaths, but most of those are serious injuries, which are serious as in all the ones that are investigated by the police is actually, including the minor injuries, it's 3,144. And as Councillor Northover said, it's also about the fear of going out, the fear of your pets being killed, the fear of reversing out your drive and having the back of your car taken off. And I get that in my ward, in an area that is 20, and there is something about how we can encourage people to just slow down and give everyone a chance to get home safely. That's what this is really all about. And sorry, the other part. So the other part is that the officers have been looking at priority areas. We're not at a point yet of looking at exactly what those are, because we need to at least discuss with the ward councils whether they want to take those forwards. But we have got, because these schemes have already existed, and particularly even in Bournemouth and Christchurch area, that around the schools they have got 20-mile-an-hour zones very close to schools. But again, if you want to encourage kids to walk or cycle to school or scoot to school, then you need to come a wider area to make that feasible, and that will take vehicles off the road, which will then create less congestion for everybody else. So it's about everyone. We have about 60 requests in apparently to the department for 20-mile-an-hour schemes that are not yet implemented. So there is a demand out there. I see it in my mailbox. Councillor Wells sees it in her mailbox, and I'm sure others do as well. Thank you.
Before I come to Councillor Trent, what I would just say about the public consultation issue is that probably will take up all the money that you're asking for if you do a full consultation. The other issue, of course, is that TRO in itself encompasses a public consultation, but tends to be much less publicised. It's a column in the Echo, which nobody ever looks at, and therefore the TRO almost goes through de facto because nobody really knows about it. So if we are going to have a consultation, can we please have one that everybody is aware of, and they give an opportunity so we really understand what residents actually want. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to disagree with a lot of the last speakers. That I actually think the report is good, albeit sort of cautious. And I wish some of the people that came out with outrageous things in the paper and so on would actually read the report and read the recommendations, because it doesn't bear any relation to what people are kicking off about. There are a few paragraphs and sentences in it that don't make a lot of sense to me. I think there's some rather random paragraphs on equalities and so on that strikes me as a bit odd, to say the least. But effectively, and I'm, as a ward councillor, I've been pushing for 20-mile-an-hour in various roads for ages, and more than 10 years ago I submitted a list. I think it's about 14 roads in my ward that residents wanted slowed, that justified needing slowing because of the presence of children and the whole layout of them. And lo and behold, since then about 4 of those roads have been delivered. And when had a serious life-changing for the lad involved accident 2 or 3 years ago in one of the roads which I had submitted some 10+ years ago, I was rather shocked to find that that road, which was 5th on the priority list at the time, because they had been prioritised based on the very things that have been mentioned, it had dropped down to 14 because it had other roads within sort of Bournemouth and Christchurch added to it. And I think £149,000 a year isn't going to deliver many roads, but I can actually say within the last fortnight, I think myself and Councillor Chapman Law had a letter from a resident about on the edge of a zone in a road which actually should be 20-mile-an-hour, asking for the 20-mile-an-hour. I did actually forward the a copy of the report for them to look at and comment on, but they didn't. But if any member here has ever had the horrible experience I had quite a long time ago, someone phoning me up on a Sunday morning, they just witnessed a girl knocked over and killed, and they were really upset and worked up about it. And this was an area that was going to get some kind of traffic calming in, but it hadn't been delivered yet. They would realise how strongly people feel about it and how concerned people are for road safety, particularly when it involves children. And I do think that we need a sensible approach. We don't need to be sort of, oh, well, everything's going to be that regardless. We do need a sensible approach. We do need a system of consulting where we find, there is a demand. And when it comes to paying for it, I know that, we've got 149,000 annual. One of the traffic calming areas that we did get put in, which was because of residents' concerns about it, we paid for out of area committee funds. Well, we've actually got the equivalent now as ward councillor funds, which may sort of help in one or two cases. But the demand far outstrips the delivery of it, and it has done for quite some time. And I think we need a structure for it to be judged against. And, you know, again, there was talk about the bus companies objecting, the police objecting. If you actually read what's said, they object to a blanket, every single road being covered. They're not objecting to the 20 mile an hour. And there is one road which was on my list, which is a bus route now, which, you know, sort of obviously the bus companies might have an opinion about it, but it's got physical measures that, you know, would slow the bus down anyway. So I think it's a sensible report. It's got a few bits that someone ought to put a pencil through and change. The ecologies, there was a bizarre sentence in that which someone quoted in the paper, and it is bizarre and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think overall the process is good, but I do think that we need to, when we can, put more funding into it, because we aren't going to deliver people's aspirations anytime over the next 10 years at 149,000 a year. So I do think we need to look at that side of it.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor Aikenhead.
Thank you. I've got sort of 2 points that I want to make about this. There are more points than questions now, having listened to everybody else. The first one is related to the. I'm actually councillor for Poole Town ward, and most of my ward is already in 20 mile an hour, and I would like to first of all agree with that. Nobody ever comes to me and says we want it going back to 30. Okay, so that is that I can corroborate that. However, I don't get complaints from people in the non-20 mile an hour places. I get some complaints from people who are in the 20 mile an hour roads saying that actually people don't stick to 20 miles an hour. And so one suggestion I would like to make is that perhaps there is some thought to not only concentrating on areas where they haven't got this, but also the areas where we've got it already, maybe looking to see if there are things that we can do to help it work better, and also to learn lessons from that in terms of if we want the roads to be safer, it's not enough to put up the sign, but some places may be enough to put up the sign. Other places, it may be that we actually need to do a little bit more than that. So that was my first point, really, in terms of, you know, really making it work. My second point is about consultation, and I don't agree with Councillor Phipps that we should do option A. I do think B is right, but I do agree with Councillor Phipps absolutely that BCP has a bad reputation when it comes to consultation, and we have got into quite a mess with a lot of things that have happened through the fact that perhaps we haven't consulted enough. And I think that the more emotive an issue is, so if people are feeling very emotional because they don't want children being knocked over, but other people are feeling very emotional because they're worried that people with disabilities won't be able to get to where they want to go, or will have more difficulty in getting to where they want to go. And we heard today, we had members of the public making strong statements on both sides of the argument. And that alerts us to the fact that this issue is not an easy issue, that we can just assume that we know best and just implement what we think's right for everyone. But we really need to do a very serious consultation, and that we need to think about whether online is enough. Some people aren't online. If we only do it online, are we getting those elderly people who actually a letter to their door would be better? And if we do spend some of our money on this consultation, isn't that a good thing? Because if you consult people, they're actually much more likely to agree with you if they're a bit on the fence. If you don't consult people, they are much more likely to be up in arms about the fact you've done something without even bothering to ask them. So I would suggest that we need to look it's not enough just to do the legal minimum. We really need to look carefully about how the consultation is done and make sure that we're not just ticking the box. Yes, consultations happened, we've done it, but what we're doing is asking the people in the areas that we're considering, do you want this in your area? Because we've got all the statistics, but the residents have the local knowledge. They know what their street is like. And if we ask them, and if the residents say, well, actually, no, it's not right for my street, then we should move on and look for another street who really wants it, like the streets that Councillor Northover was talking about earlier. Some people really want this, and it would be a real shame if we ended up bringing it in places that don't want it, at the same time as other places who do are crying out for it. So let's make sure that the consultation is front and centre and part of the prioritisation and not just an afterthought of it.
Thank you. Councillor Walters.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Firstly, I think there was a mention earlier of, you know, some statistics being influenced by environmentalism and that kind of thing. But when it comes to 20 mile an hour versus 30 mile an hour, we're literally talking about physics. It's maths. It's speed times mass equals velocity. Thank you. The faster a vehicle is going and the heavier it is, the more likely it is to kill someone if it hits you. We're all 3 seconds away from disaster at any given point. All it takes is a slight distraction as you're driving your car. You could be the best driver in the world, a child runs out in front of you, you're going 30, you've killed them. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering, could I have gone slower? Or the family and friends of that child will spend the rest of their life going, could that person have gone slower? So I think there is an emotive side to this. Outside of that, a couple of questions. So there was a mention in the report of £300 million to roll this out across the entire of BCP. Just wondering where that figure came from, because to my knowledge, the entirety of the country of Wales has managed that for 34 million so far.
Councillor Earl.
Thank you. So just to come back on that question, but I've also seen Councillor Hadley is scribbling away in case he wants to respond elsewhere. So the £300 million figure, which is in this paper, is around whether we were going to take that zone approach, which means actually making infrastructure changes. So I don't know if you've been near mine, Ollie, but oh my goodness, there are so many like speed bumps, there are chicanes, there's everything in Heatherlands that forces people to go slower. In Newtown, which is the other side of my ward, it's the lines and signs approach. So it's quite interesting to have those two, those two areas that have a different approach. But actually, the evidence is that they are both better for road safety. So rather than digging up the roads and causing a huge amount of, faff, basically, trying to create speed bumps everywhere, which isn't going to have the impact. This is a much cheaper approach, and actually it will be able to increase road safety, but also give us the potential then to really analyse which areas in particular have a problem with their junction or have a problem with compliance with the speed limit, and that's where we can take some additional interventions on road safety.
Thank you. In terms of the report, I didn't see the word nurseries appear in it at all. And I think we often will look at schools as 20 mile an hour areas. And because nurseries end up being private businesses, that they're not often considered. And I think based on my experience of speaking to a nursery owner recently, it does become a massive issue outside of nurseries as well as outside of schools. So I would ask that we give priority to those roads outside of nurseries as well as schools when we're looking at this as well. Just following on from what Councillor Phipps said, Andy, did the Poor People Party campaign on 20 mile an hour at all?
Yes, Poor People Party did suggest that road safety and 20 mile zones was an important feature of what we.
Cool. Just wondering, because part of forming a coalition is taking on board the policies of multiple parties within that coalition. So I appreciate that it may not have been what Christchurch Independents wanted or campaigned on, but part of your ability to be a part of the
administration is working with your other parties. And that allows you to do the work in Christchurch that you want to do as leader of the council, or as leaders of the council.
Do you want to comment on that, Councillor Earl?
Yes, I'm very happy to comment. So I think that Ollie's right in that we all have our priorities, and we spent a lot of time as an administration when we came together going, this is what we want, this is our, this is where we align, this is where we don't align, and so on. And we came up with a list of priorities, which is what we want to see. What do we want to achieve as an administration that's here for 4 years? And actually, road safety and improving road safety was one of the top priorities for those on the cabinet, which is why we want to pursue this. But just on the consultation element, you're absolutely right. The TRO process is clunky. It's not engaging. There's no. It's not a good process. That's the legal process. I would suggest that we would want to do the wider engagement before that. So the initial engagement would be with ward councillors and what they think are the priorities, presenting them with the statistics and the data and showing where this could make a real difference on those reducing the serious injuries and deaths in their ward. And then we would look at widening it out to the public, looking at, and you're right, residents have a huge amount of really good knowledge of their road networks because they're driving them or walking them or cycling them every single day. So we would be silly not to try and draw on that and make sure that we were delivering something that actually everyone can benefit from. Yeah, so just to confirm though, we're not going to do like a whole area like BCP consultation. It's going to be neighbourhood by neighbourhood and looking at those individual zones and the information around them and the data in those areas. Otherwise, you're right, it will just create a lot of noise and it won't be particularly thorough.
Sorry, Councillor Salmon was next. So is it about this point specifically? Oh, we'll come back to you then. Yeah, Councillor Salmon.
Okay, thank you. Nice thing about going quite late on in the list is lots of people have asked my questions. So I've only got one point that I'd like to raise really left. So like Councillor Trent said, I think I really welcome this report, and I think it was very thorough and covered a lot of the different sides of this really, as Sue said, very polarising debate. It's very difficult because there are very strong feelings on both sides, as we heard earlier. One of the things I'd like to just pick out is on page 21. There's an assertion in the second paragraph, and I think it appears a few times elsewhere in the report. It's just a straightforward assertion that 20-mile-an-hour speed limits mean longer journey times. And I understand that 20 miles an hour is slower than 30 miles an hour, of course. But what I haven't seen anywhere here or in any of the appendices is any quantitative data about how much difference there is in journey times when you reduce the speed limit. And I think because there are lots of people who feel very strongly about this and will continually say this is going to cause a problem because it's got longer journey times, that information would be very, very useful. I don't know if that information exists anywhere, and not in any great detail. No, Wales obviously did some analysis before they brought it in, but it's just really a point to raise to say, can we do some work on that? Can we have some answers to that? Because I think when we're going forward and talking to the public about this, it's going to be something we'll need to be able to discuss with some certainty. That's all I wanted to say.
Mr. Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that one of the actually the interesting things about talking to the bus company is that they do have metrics on exactly what the buses are doing all the time. So we know that their average speed is 13 miles an hour, gone down to 12 miles an hour this year because of congestion. And when you have in an urban area where you're doing start journey, you may be able to race at 30 miles an hour plus between traffic lights, but actually you then sit and all the cycles going at 11 miles an hour overtake you or undertake you. So there is something about what is the actual journey experience, because if you look at Google Maps and or other mapping companies exist, but you look at your time for your journey, very often you're not going to get a 30-mile-an-hour journey in an urban area with the best will in the world. And so the difference between being able to go at 30 and being able to go at 20 is actually not as great as people might assume.
Thank you very much. But Ben, I keep coming back to this point. It's the recommendation about assigning the money. We're actually going into the nitty gritty over the principles of this quite a bit, and I guess that does underpin whether you're going to agree. No, exactly. We've still got quite a few people wanting to speak, but I'm going to take them in the order. I know you want to speak. That's it. But are you on that point? Okay, if you'd like to go ahead with that point. And I know, did you want to speak on this point as well? Okay, please.
Yeah, so there's a few changes in my life recently, and one of those is that I've been a public health bicycle, and the journey times I've noticed, now bearing in mind my e-bike is limited to 16 mile an hour, so half the current speed limit, and yet on an awful lot of journeys, especially around rush hour, certainly during the day weekdays, if it's less than 5 miles, I'm quicker on the bike, and that's doing 16 miles an hour, not 20, than a car. So that says to me that the routes that I'm taking are shorter, more direct, because it's a bike, and I'm not having to sit in a load of traffic. I'm filtering past them all. The biggest slowing down of traffic in our area is congestion, not the speed limit.
So you're saying the traffic is moving at less than 20 miles an hour already. In fact, it's moving less than 16 miles an hour according to your bike. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point worth making, and it actually goes to the Newtown zone. I was Mayor of Poole last year and Deputy Mayor now, and the regular driver to make the journey to engagements quicker, and he'd done it with 2 or 3 previous mayors as well. He drove through the 20-mile-per-hour zones because it was actually quicker to get to the places you needed to get to, and I find that as a driver myself, through the 20-mile-an-hour zones than it is going around the peripheral roads. So fair enough, it might put 1 or 2 extra vehicles on it, but these are vehicles doing 20 miles an hour and being driven safely. And I think that's actually quite noticeable, that you do actually have this advantage in, it doesn't slow traffic down, it doesn't send people on the outer roads, because people are quite happy to go 20 mile an hour. The other thing is, and I'm surprised it hasn't been raised, but because it always gets mentioned that it's bad for fuel economy and stuff like that. Well, if you've got an option on your car of selecting estimated miles per gallon, which I've got on my cheap and cheerful bog standard car, it's actually quite surprising what miles per gallon you are doing at almost any speed. You can be doing a good miles per gallon at 20 miles an hour. You can do a rubbish miles per gallon at 30 miles an hour. And what actually makes the difference is actually how you drive. If you drive steadily, whether it's at 20 mile an hour,
I
30
think
mile an hour.
driving techniques, Councillor Trent, is not quite where we are with this.
No, but no,
I think we get your point.
No, but I think it's an important thing when people start to get all sort of aerated about, it's going to slow you down, it's going to cause problems. It doesn't.
All right, thank you very much. Can we move on now then, please? Go to Councillor Rice. Thank you. Thanks for your patience, by the way. And I know Councillor Dove is waiting as well.
Yes, I'm really pleased to see this paper coming forwards. With regards to the surveys, I would really like to see randomised surveys done. We haven't done them much within BCP particularly, but I think when it comes to transportation options, it's a really good option.
the reason that I'm particularly attached to anything to do with transport is that I became a councillor because of a 7-year-old boy that was killed by a driver when he was walking to school. Here in your ward. So there's been discussion about how to prioritise which roads and asking residents. Obviously, children don't get asked. It's also, I don't know if everybody knows because it's not in this paper, but I would like it to be added if possible. The leading cause of death in children is road danger. The leading cause of death is road danger. And as councillors, the council is responsible for all roads. Nobody else can put road safety measures on the roads, only us. So, for example, this 708 killed and significantly injured in the last year. Like if you think about a construction company, a national construction company, if they had that many injuries in a year, it would be absolutely shocking. And yet it's become normalized that we have these injuries on our roads. But children should be able to get to and from school without being killed and without being at risk, like parents being so terrified that they will be at risk of being killed that they take them in the car. So it's really, it's such an
Sorry,
important issue.
can I just ask you to be quiet, please, members?
So one suggestion I also have, and I would like potentially to see as a different option, is to look at focusing on nurseries and primary schools and secondary schools, and potentially doing a radius of 1 mile around primary schools, for example, because that would be a perfectly reasonable amount of distance to walk or cycle to primary school as a 7-year-old, and focus on that as a sort of make sure that we're implementing safer roads around every single primary school, because I wouldn't want a child to die on a road just because a ward councillor, for example, didn't want that road to be safer, or some residents on that road were vocal. So it's a really tricky one because we do want residents to be on board with this, and actually all of the data from 2020 suggests that actually like it's an easy majority that people do actually want this on their own roads. But I would just like to suggest that maybe we could focus more around schools as a way of prioritising. And then the other thing is that there wasn't much in this paper about the economic benefits of reducing congestion, which is one of the benefits of this. There's enormous benefits of children being able to get to in school independently. For example, if parents don't need to accompany their children, then they are released for sort of economic gain within our society, and it's not quantified anywhere. So I would really like to, that's just one tiny example of the difference that this can make. So economic benefits of this scheme would be useful to have in the paper. Thank you.
I think we'd all agree it'd be wonderful if we could see our children being able to get to school safely by themselves, which is what everyone used to do, of course. Councillor Haddy, did you want to come back on that? Thank you.
If I could, just to correct a figure, Chair, 700 is a 4-year figure for KSIs across the whole of BCP. So it's not just the roads for this scheme. That's just in terms of the numbers, the figure that Councillor Rose quoted. I think in terms of the primary schools and 1 mile radius, actually, if we drew a 1 mile radius around most of our primary schools, I think that covers most of the area. So there is something about looking at the communities that particularly want this, and with an ambition, as Councillor Rose has indicated, that over time we'll try and get everywhere.
Thank you. Councillor Dove.
Thank you. I am going to get to the point of why we're here tonight, and that's, do we use the money and how do we use that money? Before I say, this has been my life as an adult. I have been dealing with road deaths for most of my professional career, and I have to say that I believe passionately in making our roads safer and people not being killed or seriously injured. And if you had delivered messages, if you have gone to the scenes like I have, if you've gone to the Crown Courts to try and fight for cases like I have, you will absolutely believe and you won't understand where I'm coming from. If you've read the victim impact statements and if you've listened to the cry of a mum just being told that their child has died, you will absolutely know that I believe 100% in road safety. But what this report doesn't do is correlate road safety and the KSIs and 20 miles per hour. And the reason for that is because there isn't that correlation. There are a number of reasons why people are killed and seriously injured on our roads, and it's not the 20 miles per hour and the 30 miles per hour debate. You know, Councillor Waters was very emphatic that if a child is hit by 30 miles per hour, they will die. They don't. I've seen children being hit by a bus and they've bounced up and they've asked for if they could have a milkshake, please. So we have to be really careful in what this report is saying, why it is saying it, and what is the question that we want answered. So if we want our roads safer, is it 20 miles per hour? Well, it absolutely isn't. So just made a few notes, if that's okay, Chair, because I think facts are important rather than perhaps talking with our hearts on our sleeves. But actually, it shows in 2022 that reducing speed limits from 30 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour has little impact on road safety, according to a study from Queen's University, Belfast in Edinburgh, and the University of Cambridge. So according to ROSPA, absolutely at 40 miles per hour, you are more at risk of dying if you're hit by a vehicle. However, there isn't that much of a differential between 20 and 30 miles per hour. The 3-year research project showed that safety across the city made little difference, and it did reduce volumes of traffic. They then went into Belfast and other areas. They actually showed, in fact, another study that this is the Institute of Advanced Motorists, that traffic congestion and pollution increases where speeds are lower, and that the conflict will be more experienced by cyclists in a 20 miles per hour than in a 30 miles per hour. The Guardian, there is insufficient evidence that the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit has led to a significant reduction in the number of crashes and casualties in the UK, a government commissioned study has said. The British Medical Journals, the study of I can never say that word, epidemiology, Councillor Rice will be able to help me with that pronunciation, and community health, said that there are little impact on long-term outcomes, including road collisions and casualties. Portsmouth, my old hunting ground, the latest DFA road casualty data shows that with Portsmouth's 20 mile per hour speed limits, casualties resulting in death or serious injury rose from 91 to 143, an increase of 57%. That's where a national average was just 2%. And I've got loads and loads. And that's the reason that this number is going up. It's not because it's speed, it's due care and attention and it's failure to look properly. So the most common factor leading to road accidents, or sort of incidents, they're never accidents, was the failure of a driver or a rider to look properly. So all of the reported accidents in 2019 have been attributed to this cause as 40%, smartphones, drowsiness, etc., etc. The numbers then dip away because we had lockdown, but in 2023, they've gone back up to 38%. So we were told today in our meeting, I've just made some notes here, that actually we need to have these zones because then we can have data rejunction and hazards. It's all part of the investigation. You don't need to put zones in and limits in, because when you have a KSI, that data is collated by the police. So we could talk about this 149,000, but actually I would much rather this money was spent on cutting trees back, making sure the signs were in the appropriate places, reducing those hazards at junctions, making sure that we've got good visibility, good signage around those junctions. We absolutely need to look at where those clusters are and whether speed is the reason for it. So I used Tupton Roundabout, a horrendous accident spot or an incident spot. That wasn't speed, but we absolutely worked and re-engineered that roundabout, and hopefully those figures are down. So I'm with Margaret Phipps on this one. We should perhaps be recommending option A. So we have reduced speeds around the schools. However, if we're going to talk about road safety, we absolutely need to know of the causation. We need to get our facts right, and we can't put everything down to speed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dunn. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor, I agree with you that there are many causes of crashes and inattention and drowsiness and smartphones and drugs and drinking are all contributory factors. But so is speed. And as was said earlier, it is basic physics. And unfortunately, cars are getting bigger and they're getting heavier. The average, electric cars is significantly heavier than petrol cars, and that means that from a physics perspective, especially if you hit a child, you are more likely to kill them at a higher speed. And it might be that because of the particular circumstances of the bus, and I appreciate, as you said, it is horrible for anyone involved in scraping people off the ground or trying to go to the relatives to say, I'm really sorry, but there's been a bad accident, you need to come to the hospital now, or worse. That is absolutely awful. And for every one of those children, for every one of those adults, actually as well, elder people, as Councillor Aiken had said, it's around our older people that we need to listen to, because very often it's them that are housebound because they fear going out because of the way our roads have become. So there is something about recognising that this is one of the schemes. It is money that we already have in our local transport plan funding. It's not, we haven't got to apply for the money to the Department of Transport, and it's a very small proportion of the overall pot. And it's smaller, as we said, than the school streets pot. So there is something about making moves in this direction in order to improve the safety of all members of our community, but particularly thinking about the vulnerable, young kids and elder people. And as someone who cycles around, I know my vulnerability on the road. And I know I'd much rather be in a 20-mile-an-hour zone where people are going past me that little bit slower. It just gives more time, and it's not about the performance of the vehicle. It's about the driver, the reaction times, the extra time that gives you if you're traveling more slowly.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come in on that though, then, please?
Can I just? Did you, Emilio? Did you want to come in? Let Councillor Olliers respond to your points first. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies, Councillor Dove. I'm sure you can come back in a moment. I was just going to cite, some of the articles that you presented there. Those are ones which are often sort of thrown up. If you've been campaigning in road safety for a long time, you'd probably be aware that they are the way that they were set out has been heavily challenged. They're very misleading. And I've already had, that one from Queen's University, that's one that I've been sent so many times, but it was a very shoddy, really, way of experimenting and finding out whether 20 miles per hour actually worked in those areas. There is overwhelming evidence to say the opposite, and actually, you don't need to take it from us. There are other councils across the country who are looking at 20 miles per hour zones and limits to be able to deal with a lot of road safety issues. For example, Dorset, our neighbour, they're allocating £75,000 from their LTP onto this recommendation for them, and we're exactly the same. Our road safety, this is not just about single 20-mile-per-hour zones as an ends in itself. It's about that collective approach, and we are investing in pedestrian crossings. We've put some money towards those individual cluster sites. We have £500,000 going into safer routes to schools and crossings, but altogether, that's £3 million of capital funding going into road safety next year. This is £149,000 to look at how we can make those gains that we had in the other areas, which are already 20 miles per hour zones, to bring collisions and accidents and deaths down by 40%. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Dunn. If you can make it as quick as possible so I can move on to the next speaker, please. Thank you.
I appreciate that, but some people have gone on for quite a while telling their stories and not actually asked questions. So I'm trying to be succinct here. I understand what Councillor Hadley is saying. In terms of Dorset, let's be honest, they do have higher collisions down to speed because they have more rural roads. We don't have that. What I'm saying in terms of our budget is we need to be looking at all of the factors. We need to be looking at the physical sort of area in terms of those hazards, etc., because speed on BCP is not one of the main contributors to why we're having KSIs. And this is what that report does not say. We're putting everything down to, if we want our roads safer, we have to have 20 miles per hour. That's wrong. It's a conflation of the facts. If you want to make our roads safer, then I would suggest that this report goes back. We talk to the road desk team, we talk to the KSI team, and we look at all of the parameters, look at all of the data in terms of where those incidents have happened and that driver behaviour to make those or that's led to having those incidents arise. I just think this is a little bit slapdash and it's probably not appropriate. And I really would love for this to be the panacea to make our roads safer, but it's not. And to sell it as such is really going to be inappropriate. My last point is, would I let my 7-year-old walk to school? No, I would not. And why is that? It's not because of road safety, it's because of stranger danger and all the rest of it. So there is more to whether or not you let your child walk to school than whether or not they're going to be safe on a bike. To make our roads absolutely safe, we need to have cycle lanes, we need to have hard barriers, etc. 20 miles per hour, I'm afraid, is not the answer. I'd love for it to be the answer, but it really is not. Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chapman-Law, please.
I have to remember where I was going to go with this now. Yeah, so there's been a bit of mention of blanket and default and all this sort of stuff. And I'm looking at the map on Appendix B, and not one of the roads I rode here tonight on would be a 20 mile an hour that isn't already a 20 mile an hour, and there was only about 200 meters of that anyway. Half of that is outside this building. So to say sort of blanket or default, I mean, all of the main roads and all of the sort of the semi-main roads, they're all going to stay 30. It's only going to be the very small local residential roads that would be going to 20 anyway. That's being suggested of being going to 20, before we do any of the consultation, etc. So it's there's been a bit of misinformation out there, and I don't like where some of that talk is going. Stopping distances at 20 versus 30 is almost half. It's very, very close to half. And by the time you've hit the brakes doing 30, you've already got to the point where you would have stopped if you were doing 20 by the time you've hit the brakes. It's this whole looking at the data thing. I'd rather preempt the any further instances rather than going on historical data. It's not much, is it?
Thank you very much. Okay, did you want to come back up to the Broadhead? I've just got a few points myself, but if it's quick, please.
It was something that Councillor Dove asked, but it was about the money, and I appreciate that we've heard from the cabinet members that £150,000 isn't a lot. We've also heard that this is the start of a major programme and aspirations to see this expanded further. But I would just wonder, it's a bit of a hypothetical, but if this wasn't passed, what would you spend the 150 grand on instead? Because we've heard a lot from Councillor Dove about other things that are much more preventative than blanket speed limit reductions. Do you not think that there's potentially a better use of this money which does rely on evidence?
I would actually say the evidence is there in our own, in the work that officers have done to look at our 20 mile per hour limits and zones that exist and the impact that that has had in almost halving road collisions. In terms of what else we could spend it on, this is a way in which we can spread that benefit to other areas in our neighbourhoods, which residents are often writing to us about, often asking for, and be able to do it in a much more practical way rather than assessing every single individual resident who asks for a 20 mile per hour zone on their road. We can look at it as a zonal approach and make it work a much more affordable and a much more consultative, I'm not sure if that's a word, but a consultative approach to be able to speak to people in those zones and have them have their say on how it would impact them and how it would benefit them.
Just really quickly, Chair, and it was just another minor point, and it was just with the paper. We heard from Councillor Phipps earlier on as well, from Councillor Dove, around looking at the options on this paper and option A, and it did strike me that the wording is slightly disingenuous in this paper, because the options, it says in the options appraisal for 20-mile-per-hour speed limit delivery across BCP. And then it says option A is do nothing, followed by, however, this would see 20-mile-per-hour speed limits introduced as part of the delivery of schemes around schools or where historically significant numbers of casualties have arisen. So I just don't agree that option 1 in this is do nothing. Option A is actually work on a kind of evidence-led basis around schools and areas where it is actually needed. So I think there's something in there around, saying do nothing, where then you're actually saying do something. So I don't think if colleagues were inclined to support option A, it is actually doing nothing.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Okay, I think everyone's had their own. We're just going to have a couple of points now, if you don't mind. And actually, following on from that point, we do have a system now where residents, and we've all, as all councillors, we've all had points made to us about speeding on various roads. Everyone knows the critical areas of their own roads. So when I go to the officers for advice, inevitably I get the data does not support the the improvement that you're looking for. But now here we are saying that those roads would actually be subject to a 20-mile-an-hour limit, but there is no data to support those, because we've already been told the safety data does not exist to support the improvements. I know that Richard Prince-Croft has written to me many times and given me information on various, the critical parts in my ward. So, there's no money to do that bit. There's no data to support it. But suddenly we're going to get a system that will support it. But where's the data to support it? And it is about data. And I agree with Councillor Dove that, I think my interpretation of what's happening here is that the administration has made its mind up about what it wants to do. And it's going to produce it incrementally. And I don't think they're serious about the consultation. And I think that you're going to have a really hard time because the majority of people that I've spoken to are totally against this. Now, in this room, it's clear that there's overall support for this recommendation. And, that's fine. But I really think you need to get real and understand what residents, the majority of residents, want. And the only way you're going to do that is by a comprehensive consultation period so that decisions can be made on that basis. And I'm not arguing the case, and nobody in their right mind is going to suggest that you shouldn't improve the safety of children going to school. And if we can do that, but you need to do that if there is a case for it. If there is a case, and I'm sure that wherever we've had accidents in the past, then immediately the council's gone into gear and does whatever it can to address the issues in that way, because that's what the departments are for. No, okay, you can come back on it. Let me just finish first, and then you can shoot me down flames on all the points that I'm making. Okay, but I've got to put the other side of the coin here, because there is the other side, and it's what the residents want, and we've got to do that with a proper consultation and not drip feed it through with TROs. I'm afraid, because that wouldn't be appropriate. And if the principle is that we go for it, then everybody understands it and understands the reasons for it. But I think it's sort of slipping it in easy, progressively like this is the right way of doing it. And I know it's clear that this is what the administration wants to achieve. And what we haven't heard a lot of tonight is the promotion of active travel through this scheme, which is one of the main reasons that this is being implemented. It's in the report. That's what it says. In fact, the report goes on to say it could actually do more about promotion of active travel in there. So there's a lot more debate to be had on this, I believe. Okay, now shoot me down in flames. Who wants to go first? Councillor Rice, you look pretty aggrieved about what I said.
Well, just the 7-year-old child in Sandra's ward. I think it took 2 years to get 20 miles an hour on that one road. Can I come in? the accident of that 7-year-old child, absolutely, utterly tragic, but it was not down to speeding. And it was not down to, no road was made 20 mile as a result. The child in question ran out into the road from behind a bus because he saw his friends at the bus stop. It was not, it was a journey to school, but he was going to catch the bus to school. It was appalling. And the first thing I did was work with the officers to say, okay, what can we do to help? And it was an accident, pure and simple accident, really tragic, but an accident, and no speed involved. Upset everybody that was involved with it. But at the end of the day, what I did, with the help of officers, was to introduce 3 zebra crossings in that road, so that at least other people could use the zebra crossings. But there was no 20 mile reductions, and I wouldn't be asking for a 20 mile reduction in that road because it wouldn't work.
Thank you, Councillor. You've made
Okay.
a really good point there. Is that, you know, is the money that's available being targeted at the best solution, and that's what we've not heard a lot of, about what the other options for improving safety in those critical areas is, because there may be better ways of doing it. Councillor Price, I know you wanted to come back again.
Just to say, I wasn't saying that there was speeding in that area, but if I did think that you had organised for 20 mile an hour following that death, so apologies, I got that wrong. But if they were going at 30 miles, well, we don't know necessarily what speed they were going, but every time that we reduce the speed of a vehicle reduces the chance of anybody being hit, being more seriously injured. So even if in that specific case, over 30 miles an hour was not an issue, there would have been lots of other factors. And I do not accept that it is an accident. There are other places that have worked on road safety and have reduced the risk to children and everyone using their roads. It is an avoidable thing. It's not an accident. It is designed. It's like, but there are lots of things designed about our roads that increase the risk of a crash happening.
Members, I'll give you a chance, Councillor, just to come back in a second, but I'd just like to point out that we've had no proposals or recommendations this evening against the recommendation that we are considering this evening. So you might just want to briefly think about that.
I'd like
So-
to make one.
Okay, but before we do that, Councillor, did you want to have the last word in this debate, or are you if you're finished, we're finished, and we can move on.
I feel, can I just say something? I feel like a lot has been said in the last 10 minutes. I haven't had a chance to just come back to it, which is really, really frustrating, which means a lot of it is probably now gone into the ether. I think though that where this is important is looking at where we can make a meaningful impact across a wider area. And you're absolutely right, there are some cluster sites where we have 5 or 6 incidents happening quite regularly, and we do have money in our LTP for looking at remedies and interventions on those ones. By the way, the LTP paper will be published. It's with the cabinet papers, so have a look at that as well to see the breakdown of what that goes on to, especially around road safety, because this is not, this is not the whole road safety budget. It's a very, very small, limited amount. And that in terms of the consultation, it is looking at that way in which we can bring people along. But I would actually say there is a slight loggerhead here between where the evidence drives us and where the people drive us. Our role as an administration is to be able to balance those two. For me, I think an evidence approach based approach is really, really important. But like Councillor Phipps said, there is this element of the public not wanting it, and it's a very difficult political line to walk, but we're prepared to walk it because we believe that the benefits of 20 mile per hour are going to outweigh those. There is evidence, Councillor Phipps. And, I don't know where in this report it says there's no evidence for 20 miles per hour, but it actually says there is a lot of evidence that 20 miles per hour is beneficial in the zones we have it in BCP and along with other areas in the country where they have had 20 miles per hour, and it's significantly decreased the risk of death and serious injury on roads. And that if we were an administration and ignoring that, quite frankly, that would be an embarrassment. We need to try and tackle this, go in line with the DFT, go in line with everyone who does not feel it's acceptable for people to die on our roads.
I think we'd all agree with that point, Councillor. Councillor. Okay, we've got 3 people want to speak here. Are you all wanting to make a proposal? Yeah. Councillor Trent, did you want to make a proposal?
Yes.
Okay, well, could you make it then and see if you can get a seconder for it, please, because we're going to move on.
Yeah, I would like to propose that we accept that we support the recommendation in this report, and that it should go to cabinet. But we very much made the point about the need for robust consultation, and I think perhaps we ought to add a comment that that when zones or roads come up for consideration, that there should be a robust consultation as part of that process, so that nothing's imposed on people. It has to be a robust consultation.
Okay, so we're basically, you're going to support the proposal subject to satisfactory public consultation of the recommendation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, have you got a seconder for that?
Can you hear do we know what the words are?
Well, we don't compare proposals. We take them, they take them in the sequence that they're made.
You need
okay.
to get the words for
So
get the words.
well, I think I just gave the words, didn't I? I put them as succinctly as I possibly could, because you can't have 2 paragraphs for. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Does anybody want to speak? Let's have your seconder first. Who's your seconder? Okay. Does anybody want to speak on that proposal, and or make an amendment to it?
Chair, I just as a matter of kind of not point of order, but if we have other proposals coming forward that differ from accepting the recommendation, would it not be wise to maybe receive them first? Otherwise, we're in danger of accepting something and then taking a vote on not accepting it afterwards.
Well, yeah, but you know, the process normally is to make the proposal, get a seconder, and then talk to that point. It either fails or falls. Am I correct?
Sorry, the proposal from Councillor Trent would just be that the Overview and Scrutiny Board supports the recommendation as outlined in the report, but makes a comment to Cabinet that when zones or roads come up for consideration, there should be further robust public consultation on them. But I think if there's a similar proposal that someone wants to put forward, I think you could put it on the table now, not seek a seconder at the moment, and then you could discuss around that. And likewise, again, if Councillor Broadhead has another proposal, it might be worth considering that first before we then go into a debate on.
Is members content with that? That's not the way we know. That's not the normal way we do it. But,
no, it's not.
Okay, so Councillor Broadhead, do you want to go next then?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mine is perhaps a bit cleaner. I'd like to formally propose that we accept option A as per the proposals that are in front of us. I've mentioned earlier on that I disagree that option A is do nothing. I actually suggested that we all focus on the words afterwards, which is that looking at 20-mile-per-hour speed limits are introduced as part of the delivery of schemes around schools and where historically significant numbers of casualties or casualty clusters have arisen. As part of that recommendation, I would also ask that, you know, if the administration wants to expand 20-mile-per-hour speed limits further, as you've said, Chairman, that should be a consultation process about the principle rather than just as we've had with this recommendation relying on the TROs. So that's the background, but the formal recommendation would be to accept option A.
That recommendation is actually contrary to the one that's been tabled at the moment. It's an alternative one.
It's also contrary to the truth, what I said.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Aikenhead.
want to move an amendment to Councillor Trent's proposal because I'm happy with accepting B, but I would want to amend the words to be stronger, to say that we accept option B, subject to the cabinet committing to ensure there is robust and meaningful consultation and residents' views are taken into account before a decision is made.
I think that's perfectly in line with what I proposed. Just
So, yeah.
words.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
if you accept that amendment, councillor Trent, and the seconder accepts that amendment,
Councillor
okay, so that's the one we've got tabled at the moment. Councillor Rice, we now can speak to that, okay?
I wanted to speak to Phil Broadhead's proposal.
Okay, well, let's deal with this one then first, shall we?
Speak against this one.
Yeah.
Or so,
Yeah,
Chair,
that's a
just
a different one.
can I just come in, just so everyone's clear on sort of what the situation is at the moment? We have the proposal that's being moved and seconded by Councillor Trent. They're amended and I think agreed by the mover and second now with Councillor Aikenhead's wording. So that's the move that's on the table, but we're also aware of what Councillor Broadhead would like to propose.
But I think we need to vote. We need to vote on this one that's been proposed by Councillor Trent, seconded by Councillor Salmon, that's amended by Councillor Aikenhead. So all those in favour of that motion? Okay. We have debated it. We have debated it, haven't we?
Yeah, Councillor
Thank
Rice
you.
could speak on it if she wanted.
She doesn't want to speak on this one.
Okay.
6, 7,
I'm not voting on
8
it.
in favour.
Okay, 8 in favour. All those against?
2,
3. Thank you. So that one is carried. And you have a proposal you wish to make?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a bit backwards, but considering the committee has already accepted option B, but mine was to accept option A, which was to see 20-mile-per-hour speed limits not introduced in that way, but as part of a delivery scheme around schools and where casualty clusters have arisen. And also make the point that we would expect to see a much further robust consultation around the principle before any further work took place.
If you require a seconder.
Yeah, Councillor Phipps.
Shall I just say a few words? Absolutely second that. I think this is being, the way it's being done at the moment, or being proposed at the moment, portfolio holders is an imposition of 20-mile-per-hour limits across here because you're asking for money to implement them and nobody's asked anybody. We're supposed to be an open and transparent council and we need to get the principle right before we start. So that's my view and I'm happy to second that. Thank you.
Chair, we don't view that this would be a valid motion, given that the proposal is to accept option B when you've already voted to accept option A, because it's completely contrary. Unless there are any comments that you want to refine, so you're not talking about the option itself, that can be added on to what has already been agreed, but I don't think you can vote on it as it is.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm sorry if I've led you down the garden path there, but we would, Councillor Rice wanted to speak, yeah. Okay, we won't vote on it, but I don't think there's any reason why we can't talk about the points that Councillor Broadhead has made.
Thank you. Well, my amendment was going to be that we consider, as part of your suggestion, Councillor Broadhead, that the radius around each primary school for 80% of the attendees is considered for measures to improve safety, because that is one of the suggestions I suggested.
Councillor Rice, you could, I think you could probably make a proposal, an additional proposal, an additional recommendation, I believe, as a separate recommendation.
But it can't be as part of my amendment because
No,
it's been
not
ruled
as
out.
not as part of that, because that was contrary to what's been agreed by. But you could, if you wanted to, make an additional recommendation for cabinet.
Yeah, something along the lines of cabinet consider
focusing road safety measures around, or the 20 mile an hour around 80% of attendees of primary school students to their primary school. It's not very clear.
Does anybody wish to second that?
Need a bit more clarity on
Yeah.
what that is.
Anybody else wants to say it in a more clear way?
Can you put some better words on it?
Can you?
I wasn't thinking of anything. I was wondering if the
we,
thought you
we
were
need to
asking.
clarify that.
Oh,
a little. Yeah, so clarify and try to keep it as simple as you can.
For Cabinet to consider a focus on identifying areas around primary schools as a priority. Primary schools and nurseries and secondary schools, all schools.
Chair, can I just come in and clarify that that it would be that overview and scrutiny recommend to Cabinet that it considers focusing, identifying areas around schools and nurseries for the introduction of 20 mile per hour road safety measures.
Okay, sorry, have we got a seconder for that? We had Councillor North. Are you happy with those words? Okay, we can speak to that now. Well, I have to say, I think that's already encompassed within the paper itself, because I think it's implicit in the statement of the paper. That's the intent. But okay, Councillor, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. If it may help, there is a £500,000 allocation for Safe Routes to School within the capital, the LTP capital programme separately. So we are already prioritising those areas. You're absolutely right that we will be looking at that in terms of these zones and whether you incorporate schools in a wider zone. But that's already there as a priority around, and some of that will be about physical measures and crossings and those sorts of things to help kids to get safely to schools.
Having heard what Councillor Hadley said, do you still want to go ahead?
Yeah.
You do? Okay. All right then. So we have, anybody else wish to comment on that? Okay, so go to the vote then. All those in favour of that motion? Unanimous. Yep. Thank you. Councillor Broadhead.
Chair, if I could just make one final point, and I appreciate this isn't entirely of your doing, certainly not deliberately, but I would like it to be noted my real annoyance that I was prevented tonight from putting a motion forward contrary to what the recommended proposal was on this. I think it would have helped the debate. I think it would have enabled those that do have a different way of doing this to express their opinion. And I find it really quite bizarre that the recommendation was not accepted as part of a process, but I've said my piece. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I probably need to clarify that with the Democratic Services as well, because I understood that you take it one at a time and you vote on it, and if it's contrary to something that you're going to do, then I'm afraid that's tough, isn't it? You know, but I can talk to Democratic Services about that. We take your point. Understood. Okay. I think we've had enough of that one. We'll move on. Well, I think we're going to be talking about, we've got our forward plan to talk about, and I know that we can be as quick as we can on it, but we've seen the forward plan, it's attached, but there are some papers in there about our approach towards identifying subjects for overview and scrutiny in the future. And there's quite a lot of work has been gone into this. We've had a number of meetings about it. Probably best if I hand over to Lindsay Marshall, our Democratic Services Officer, just to cover that. Just talk about it for a few minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Many of the people in the room have been at the one or more of the workshops, but for the benefit of anyone who hasn't, the attachment at Appendix E to your forward plan report sets out the output of the 3 recent workshops that we have held with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. The purpose of those was to develop a work plan for the board, but not just a list of items that you want to look at, but the approach that you want to take, and taking account of good practice in terms of how you will approach your work programming. And what we have created through that workshop series is a framework that will be used to communicate how you intend to undertake your scrutiny, and how you will make your decisions around what items you will consider at scrutiny. So that is what is at Appendix E. And it also includes in there a lens that was developed through the workshop, which is almost a sort of a statement that says we will look at things in this way. This is our priority, and this is how we will frame our scrutiny. So I will just pick out the key points that you need to be aware of, but what you're being asked to do tonight at recommendations B and C of for plan report is to consider and confirm the agreements that were made in those workshops, i.e. confirm the lens and the framework for scrutiny that's set out at Appendix E, and also to note the next steps in developing the board's work programme, which is also set out at the end of Appendix E. I think it's just helpful just to pick out some of the key clear agreements that came out from those workshops. Councillors were very clear that they wanted scrutiny to be member driven, so many suggestions for scrutiny work were put forward, including in the wider organisation, not just from this committee, and that you wanted to do more proactive scrutiny. You wanted to retain some pre-decision scrutiny of cabinet reports in your committee meetings, but not to be dominated by that. It was clear that you wanted to have a real focus on residents and communities and how the council's work impacts on residents. There was an acknowledgement that ONS doesn't work in isolation, and that for you to determine where you can add value to the organisation and which cabinet reports to look at, you needed good information sharing from the cabinet and a trust between ONS and the executive members in terms of you understanding what's coming up. And there is an appetite for working in different ways, predominantly moving some of your work off from the committee setting and freeing up space for some of that proactive work that you want to do. So Appendix E sets out the framework. It splits scrutiny into proactive, reactive and pre-decision scrutiny. And crucially for you, what it suggests is that for pre-decision scrutiny, there's a suggestion that you hold some briefings in an informal space. So many of the reports that might be selected to come forward, perhaps a cabinet report might come forward partly because there's a lack of understanding of what the issue is. There is a lack of information in advance, and so having a briefing in an informal way will give you that opportunity. So there's a suggestion that a series of briefings be established to help you through that. And there's also a suggestion that you do some more horizon scanning. So outside of meetings, receive some links or have a hub online regularly where you can look at some high level reports, financial performance information, maybe complaints data, and see if there are any red flags coming up. And to go back to the lens, in the workshops there was quite a lot of discussion around where the ONS board wants to focus its energies, because you have a very wide remit, and by establishing a lens it helps to channel that. There was talk about the finances of the council, we looked at risk, but the area that we kept returning to was resident impact and experience. And so the lens that is written in at part 2 of Appendix E is that says the ONS board will approach work through a lens of resident impact and experience, such as considering benefits that could be brought to residents by delivering services in different ways, how the areas of highest financial risk for the council may impact on residents, and the council's relationship with the public and work that can be done to strengthen this. So what we're looking for from you is to confirm whether you are in agreement with that lens, tonight, and to confirm whether you're happy with the framework, which is the coloured section of Appendix E as it is set out. And then taking account of any of your comments tonight or any changes you might want to make, the next steps for your work plan are for us to have some discussions with the executive, because it's very important that they work with you and share information with you, and successful scrutiny will hinge on that. So we have a discussion lined up to talk with them. And then there are topics that you have developed in your workshops. We've looked at some of the key lines of inquiry for your proactive topics, but they need a bit more scoping. They need some further agreement with you, and then we would be able to transition to some new ways of working and bringing forward some of your proactive work in sort of May or June. So I'll pause there. If you've got any questions or queries.
Members? Yeah, that's more there.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, 2 points. First of all, on the lens, which is looking at what residents and their views are on the impacts, it feels to me that that's the right lens to look at. Not least because only 10 minutes ago, I was quite surprised to hear the Deputy Leader say that when trying to tread the line between what residents want and what we as administration think is the right thing to do, they're not afraid to basically ignore residents. So therefore, I think it puts an even more of an onus on us to be the voice of the residents, if that's the line the administration are taking. A practical question I have on the focus on more of a focus on pre-decision scrutiny, which I'm really keen on. And Chair, you and I both know from conversations we've had in only the past couple of weeks that it is really quite difficult within the organisation to get the information that is required for that credible pre-decision scrutiny. And look, we heard from the leader tonight describing our session as a waste of time because we're trying to deal with the issues ahead of the decision pretty much being taken. So I just wonder how practically we can get that trust in place, or well, I suppose not even trust, how we can get the expectation in place that this overview and scrutiny board is separate from the cabinet and the administration. And if we want to look at something, and if we want the credible information to come through, then we darn well will get it.
Yeah, well, I can say in terms of trying to get the upfront information from the cabinet in particular, we have set out this arrangement now to meet with cabinet members. In fact, quarterly. I think it was agreed quarterly. Yeah, to try to get up ahead of some of these issues, because you're right, we very often don't hear about these things to the last minute, and very often it appears in the cabinet forward plan just a few weeks before. And I have to say that they are improving the cabinet forward plan, so we are looking ahead a lot further than we have been previously. The second point, which now completely escaped my mind, is how do we get ahead? Sorry, it has been difficult. I can tell you it has been difficult, and it has been difficult getting reports presented to this committee as requested by us. But make no mistake, in terms of the independence of this, I am working as hard as I possibly can to make officers and the administration aware that we are independent, and the reason, in fact, it's the legal requirement is that we are independent and complementary to the cabinet's work. And I think that is being recognised more and more now. And in fact, I've even heard it quoted that we understand that you need to be independent. And I think that message is getting home. And we've had to drive really hard to get things on the agenda that previously have been resisted. In fact, we still do get resistance, but I think that is improving. And I think with our hopefully with the meetings that we hold with senior administration people, earlier, that we'll get that in there. Yeah, Councillor Rice wanted to speak. I just before. Did anybody else want to speak on that issue at the moment? Yeah, Councillor Trent.
Yeah, I do think it's important that we do get involved in things at an early stage. I often quote my own experience when I chaired a scrutiny when we were given, the council is looking at changing their policy on waste handling and so on. we were involved from the word go. We weren't involved when someone had come up with a plan and, you know, this is our plan, what do you think of it? We were actually involved in developing it, and I was an opposition scrutiny chair, so it wasn't, you know, sort of, but we then actually, because we were involved in it and we looked at all the options, we had skin in the game. We actually had an involvement with the policy, and we actually felt that we could support it in the form that we had recommended. You know, there were tiny little marginal differences where, you know, someone said, well, you know, we can't go do this or do that. But that is the one thing that is missing from scrutiny at the moment. And I think because we've got over the urgent balance in the book situation, which was going to be a situation anyway, regardless, because, you know, there had to be some urgent decisions made. But I think now things are more long term. And I looked at the forward plan and I saw one or two things on there that perhaps we might sort of like to comment on at an early stage. But, you know, I think we should be involved a lot sooner and be looked on as a resource by cabinet. You know, we aren't necessarily there to pull apart what the cabinet's coming up with. You know, it would be useful if we were actually contributing towards what was coming forward. So I feel very strongly about that point, and you know, I kind of hope that we move in that direction.
I do agree with you, but you know, we should not forget our role in holding the administration to account, which is another key element of what we do. But I'm hoping we can. The difficulty is going to be in getting the number of issues onto the agenda that we all want to put on there. And I think that the framework that we now have is going to be a very useful tool in helping us to be as useful as we possibly can be. So and it's work in progress, but as I keep saying, we are going to have to do a lot more work behind the scenes and outside, and ex-committee and individuals are going to have to take on specific bits of work for themselves. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. Councillor Rice.
Yes, my expectation following the workshops was that we were all quite keen to see scrutiny done differently and be involved earlier on. So in my head, I'm thinking that I would like to see about 80% of our work as proactive scrutiny. But I would just like to see what other people have got in their head as to the proportion of work that would be under that category or otherwise, so that maybe then the officers have an understanding of the group sort of proportions a bit better.
Can you ask me what on sport? You know, it's a really difficult, you know, for me to, I can't possibly put an answer to that.
Well, I suppose
because I mean, what I can say is it's incredibly difficult when you suddenly find something on the forward plan, which is a vital decision, and that you have to say, well, I'm sorry, we can't look at that because you can't put it on the agenda because we're focusing on other things.
Well,
this is hard.
That is an interesting point, and as a chair, it would be quite difficult. So maybe that introduces another process that may be useful, because if we are committed to this, then we all could help the chair decide, okay, no, we have committed to work proactively. So you could, if something urgent came up, you could do a survey quite easily digitally. Shall we add this on or not? That could be an extra process, but
yeah,
it'll be easy to slip into being reacting and doing decision stuff really easily if we don't have targets.
I mean, we've just had several workshops now. We've spent an inordinate amount of time trying to understand how the way forward, and we actually have found it very difficult to do that. But we're not going to give up. We are going to keep going with it, and let's just hope it takes us to where we want to be. Lindsay.
Yeah, just wanted to come back on the point that Councillor Rice is making, because it's a very valid one. It's very easy and would be very easy to slip into multiple cabinet reports coming back onto an agenda. And from witnessing scrutiny under different administrations over a number of years now, it's my view that often things join the agenda because there isn't a full clarity of what is coming forward in that decision. And there is a difference between cabinet decisions coming forward because ONS want to understand the decision, and decisions coming forward because ONS have decided that knowing the detail of the decision, it's important enough that it must come to scrutiny before Cabinet. And what we're trying to do is set up a process by which you can determine the difference between the two items. So, for example, your discussion around Wessex Fields tonight, you may have chosen that it was necessary to have some of that discussion anyway, having known some of the detail. But clearly there was an element of you wanting to scrutinise it because there was a lack of clarity around the detail of what was happening in that area. And the aim for having informal briefings set up for you as scrutiny is that you can ask decision makers to come forward to you at least 3 months before a decision is due to give you an outline of the direction of travel of that decision. And there's a benefit to them as well because they can get some early buy-in from you as ONS. You can give some input to that direction of travel, but that should help you to determine what really needs to come into scrutiny and what doesn't. And that is really crucial, I think, because otherwise you will not create enough time in your work plan to move forward on your proactive scrutiny. And there are a lot of ideas and enthusiasm for proactive scrutiny from among the members. And the other point I just wanted to make, Chair, was that moving to any new kind of system, obviously there's an element of just trying it and seeing how it works. And there's a suggestion written in there that we review this annually. You could choose to review it 6 months after you have got moving in the new form of scrutiny work. And it's very important to keep it under review and make sure that you tweak it as needed.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, in response to what Councillor Rice said about the percentage that we might do, I think one thing that I first thought of about that is that when we were talking about proactive scrutiny at the workshops, some of the things that people gave as examples were actually pre-decision scrutiny rather than truly proactive. And so one of the difficulties we might have is actually in thinking of things that really are proactive and aren't things that are just decisions that we're making them very early. But I think it is very important to do both. The pre-decision scrutiny is very important as well. But in terms of how much proactive scrutiny we do, I think that I'd never imagine that we'd spend 80% of our meetings here doing proactive scrutiny. But I think that's because I'd rather see us do the proactive scrutiny in a different method than in a meeting like this. And that actually the proactive scrutiny is more likely to be something that we'll do in groups and work smaller groups, gathering the evidence separately and then bring the results to the committee. And so if we do it that way, it will actually be more work. But if we do it on subjects that we're really dedicated to, we might find that quite a lot of our work is proactive scrutiny, but it's not necessarily done in this committee, in this room.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
When I said 80%, I wasn't meaning this particular time, I suppose. I was meaning the resources that were allocated to overview and scrutiny overall, sort of thing. So, yeah.
Okay. I just want to cover the agenda for the next meeting. There are a couple of things. Well, at the moment, we've got the seafront strategy is on there. She's coming. The new seafront strategy is coming out. There's also a paper coming forward on commercial and planning aspects of the seafront and Lower Garden. This follows some investigation or research work that I've been doing for the last 6 months, and it brings a summary of some of the issues that I've identified. And the director has agreed to bring a paper forward to our meeting to sort of look at that review and to come up and tell us what action plans, etc., are being drawn up as a result of that inquiry. The other thing is that we are due to look at the assurance review progress. Now, we suspect that because we've got Wessex Fields And we've also got the pay and reward strategy coming, or update on the pay and reward issue coming forward for cabinet. We feel that those items should now be on our next agenda. So the assurance review issues, which we think will be a report on what's already been achieved, and I think we're all fairly up to date that they're making good progress on the assurance review, that we can determine what those measures are and report if there's a problem, basically, and not actually have that one on the agenda. To give us enough room to look at those 4 items that I've just mentioned. So, but I would seek your agreement on that proposal. If you're content with that, we're then looking at the 3 recommendations that we've got in this forward plan recommendation. So it's 3 recommendations. We can take them all together. We can do them individually. I'm personally happy to propose that we accept those recommendations, and I think Sue is prepared to second them. Would anybody like to talk about that recommendation? No, can we just take it as agreed then? Okay, agreed. Okay, thank you very much. So I think that then brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you very much, members.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.